The gun wasn't supposed to be loaded. That's what Seraphina Vale told herself when she pointed it at her new husband's chest 3 hours after their wedding. Blood soaked through his white shirt, while enemies poured into the estate gardens like wolves who smelled fresh meat. Lucien D'Aquila, crime lord, killer, the man who owned her father's debt, stared at her with those black eyes and said something that changed everything. If you're going to shoot me, make it count. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. If you want to know how a deal forged in desperation became the most dangerous love story on the eastern seaboard, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Let me take you back to where it started. The rain came down like nails against the car window as Seraphina pressed her forehead to the cold glass and watched the city lights blur into watercolor smears. Her father sat beside her in the back seat, smelling like expensive scotch and cheap desperation. He hadn't looked at her since they left the apartment. "You don't have to say anything," Marcus Vale muttered, his voice rough as gravel. "I know what you're thinking." Seraphina didn't move. "Do you? That I'm a coward? That I'm selling you to save my own skin?" He lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "You'd be right." She finally turned to look at him. Her father had always been handsome in that silver-haired country club way that made people trust him with their money. Tonight he looked like exactly what he was, a gambler who'd run out of luck and options. "How much do you owe him?" $7 million. Marcus took a long drag. "Give or take." Jesus Christ. I had a system. It was working until it wasn't. Seraphina laughed, but there was no humor in it, just the hollow sound of a woman watching her life collapse in real time. "And now what? I marry some gangster and your debt disappears?" Marcus stared straight ahead. "Lucien D'Aquila doesn't forgive debts, sweetheart. He collects them. This is the only collection I can afford." The car turned down a private road that climbed into the hills overlooking the harbor. Through the rain, Seraphina could make out the silhouette of an estate that looked less like a home and more like a fortress. High walls, security gates, armed men in dark suits standing beneath floodlights that cut through the storm. Her stomach turned to ice. "What if I say no?" she asked quietly. Marcus finally looked at her. His eyes were red-rimmed and ancient. "Then they kill me tonight and come for you tomorrow. At least this way you're protected." "Protected?" Seraphina tested the word in her mouth like poison. "That's what you're calling this?" "I'm calling it survival." The car stopped at the main entrance. A man in a black overcoat emerged from the shadows and opened her door. Rain immediately soaked through her coat as she stepped out onto the cobblestones. The man didn't speak, just gestured toward the massive wooden doors that hung open like a mouth. Seraphina walked inside alone. The entrance hall stretched out before her like something from another century. Marble floors, vaulted ceilings, art that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. But underneath all that European elegance, she could feel something else, something cold and watchful. This was a beautiful cage, and she was about to become its newest prisoner. "Miss Vale." The voice came from her left. Seraphina turned to find a woman in her 50s with severe features and a tailored black dress that looked expensive enough to fund a small country. "My name is Elena. I manage the household." The woman's accent was Eastern European, her expression unreadable. "Follow me, please. You have 2 hours to prepare." "Prepare for what?" Elena's smile was thin as a razor. "Your wedding, of course." They climbed a curved staircase to the second floor, where Elena led her down a hallway lined with doors that all looked identical. The older woman stopped at the last one and pushed it open. The bedroom inside was larger than Seraphina's entire apartment. A 4-poster bed dominated the center, draped in dark fabrics that absorbed the light. French doors opened onto a balcony overlooking the gardens, where she could see more security personnel moving through the rain like ghosts. "The dress is in the closet," Elena said. "Shoes are your size. Someone will come for you at 8. "Wait." Seraphina grabbed the woman's arm before she could leave. "I need to speak with Lucien before any of this happens." Elena looked down at Seraphina's hand on her sleeve, then back up at her face. "Mr. D'Aquila doesn't meet with acquisitions before the transaction is complete." "Acquisitions?" The word hit Seraphina like a slap. "That's what I am?" "That's what everyone is here, Miss Vale." Elena pulled her arm free gently but firmly. "The sooner you understand that, the easier this becomes." Then she was gone, and Seraphina was alone in a stranger's bedroom, about to marry a man she'd never met to pay for sins that weren't hers. She walked to the balcony and stepped out into the rain. The cold water ran down her face and neck, soaking through her clothes, but she didn't care. She needed to feel something real, something that wasn't this nightmare. Below, she could see the city spreading out like a carpet of lights. Somewhere down there, people were living normal lives, going to dinner, watching movies, falling in love because they wanted to, not because their fathers gambled away their freedom. Seraphina wondered if she'd ever be one of those people again. At exactly 8 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. She'd found the dress in the closet like Elena promised. It wasn't white. It was the color of arterial blood, deep crimson silk that clung to her body like a second skin. When she'd first seen it, she almost laughed. At least whoever chose it had a sense of irony. This wasn't a wedding. It was a sacrifice. The door opened and a young woman with dark hair and nervous eyes peeked inside. "They're ready for you, miss." Seraphina followed her downstairs and through a series of corridors that twisted deeper into the estate. The sounds of rain faded, replaced by something else. Music. Voices. The clink of crystal glasses. They emerged into a vast hall that had been transformed into something between a ceremony and a performance. 50 people, maybe more, stood in evening wear with champagne flutes and predatory smiles. None of them looked like they were here to celebrate. They looked like they were here to watch. At the far end of the hall, beneath an archway wrapped in black roses, a man waited. Lucien D'Aquila. Seraphina had seen pictures, grainy surveillance photos and newspaper articles about alleged racketeering and conspiracy charges that never seemed to stick. But photographs didn't capture the reality of him. He was tall, over 6 feet, with the kind of build that came from violence, not gyms. Dark hair swept back from a face that might have been handsome if it wasn't so cold. His suit probably cost more than a car, perfectly tailored to a body that looked like it knew 100 ways to kill you. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Black. Utterly black. Like looking into a well with no bottom. Those eyes tracked her movement as she walked down the aisle between people who whispered behind their hands. She could hear fragments of conversation. Vale's daughter. Debt payment. Give her 30 days. Seraphina kept her chin up and her spine straight. If this was a transaction, she'd be damned if she acted like merchandise. When she reached the front, Lucien extended his hand. His skin was cool and dry against hers. "Miss Vale." His voice was deep and controlled, no accent she could place. "Thank you for coming. Did I have a choice?" One corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile. No. The officiant, some nervous little man in an expensive suit, began reading from a prepared script about union and partnership and other words that meant nothing in this context. Seraphina barely heard him. She was too focused on the man standing next to her, radiating control like heat from a furnace. "Do you, Lucien Alessandro D'Aquila, take this woman?" "I do." The officiant blinked. "I haven't finished, Mpo." "I don't need the performance." Lucien's eyes never left Seraphina's face. "Get to the signature." Papers appeared on a table beside them. Lucien signed first, his handwriting sharp and precise. Then he handed the pen to Seraphina. She stared down at the marriage certificate. Her hand hovered over the document. This was it. The last moment she could walk away. Except she couldn't. They'd kill her father. Maybe her too. And even if they didn't, what kind of life was she walking back to? An empty apartment and student loans she'd never pay off. At least this way she had a chance. Seraphina signed her name. The room erupted in polite applause that sounded more like a threat than celebration. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant squeaked. Lucien stepped closer. He cupped her face with both hands, tilted her chin up, and kissed her like he owned her. His mouth was surprisingly warm, his grip firm but not brutal. The kiss lasted exactly long enough to make his point. When he pulled back, he kept his lips close to her ear. "Most people break within 30 days in my world," he whispered. Seraphina met those black eyes and forced herself to smile. "Then maybe your world hasn't met the right woman yet." Something flickered across Lucien's expression. Not quite surprise, more like recognition. Like he'd just spotted a worthy opponent on a battlefield he thought he controlled. Then it was gone, replaced by that same cold mask. He took her hand and led her through the crowd toward a reception that felt more like a board meeting than a celebration. People congratulated Lucien with careful voices while their eyes assessed Seraphina like livestock. A server appeared with a champagne. Seraphina took a glass and drained half of it in one swallow. Careful. Lucien's voice was low beside her. You'll need your wits intact tonight. Why's that? Because every person in this room is deciding whether you're an asset or a liability. He gestured subtly toward a group of older men in dark suits. Those are representatives from 3 rival organizations. If they think you make me weak, we'll have problems. What kind of problems? The kind that end with funerals. Seraphina set down her glass. Then I better make a good impression. She started toward the group of men, but Lucien caught her wrist. His grip was steel wrapped in skin. What are you doing? Becoming an asset. She pulled free and kept walking. The men stopped talking as she approached. They were all in their 60s or 70s, with faces that looked carved from granite and eyes that had seen too much blood. Gentlemen, Seraphina said smoothly. I wanted to introduce myself, Seraphina D'Aquila. The name felt strange in her mouth, but she didn't let it show. The tallest one, silver-haired with scars on his knuckles, looked her up and down like she was a curiosity. Angelo Messina, you're Vele's girl. I was. Seraphina kept her voice level. Now I'm Lucien's wife. Wife, Angelo snorted. That's a polite word for collateral. Is it? Seraphina tilted her head. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a strategic alliance between complementary skill sets. But maybe I'm reading the situation wrong. The other men exchanged glances. Angelo's expression shifted from dismissive to interested. What skills would those be, Mrs. D'Aquila? I spent 3 years managing international logistics for 8 organizations in East Africa and Central Asia. Port operations, customs coordination, supply chain optimization across hostile territories. She paused. I imagine those skills translate reasonably well to other forms of international infrastructure. Dead silence. Then Angelo threw back his head and laughed. She's got spine, Lucien. I'll give you that. Seraphina felt Lucien appear at her side, his presence like a wall of controlled violence. My wife is full of surprises, he said quietly. Angelo's smile faded. Let's hope those surprises don't create complications. They won't, Lucien replied. Will they, Seraphina? She looked up at her new husband and saw the warning in his eyes. Don't push too hard. Not yet. Of course not, she said. I'm just here to support my husband's vision. The word vision hung in the air like a challenge. But before anyone could respond, gunfire erupted from somewhere outside the hall. Everyone froze. Then chaos. Men reached for weapons hidden in shoulder holsters and waistbands. Women screamed. Security personnel came flooding into the room, shouting commands in languages Seraphina didn't recognize. Lucien grabbed her arm and yanked her behind him as more shots rang out. Glass shattered. Someone was yelling about breaches in the perimeter. Stay down, Lucien ordered. What's happening? Someone's making a move. His gun was already in his hand. Where the hell had he been hiding that? They picked tonight because they think a wedding makes us vulnerable. More gunfire. Closer now. Seraphina could hear boots pounding in the corridor outside. Lucien's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression darkening. We need to move. Now. He pulled her toward the side exit, but before they reached it, the doors burst open and 3 men in tactical gear flooded in with automatic weapons. They weren't security. They were the attack. Lucien fired twice. The first man dropped. The second dove behind a pillar. The third aimed directly at Seraphina. Time slowed. She saw the barrel swing toward her chest. Saw Lucien turning, too far away to intercept. Saw her own death in the shooter's eyes. Then something inside her went cold and clear. She grabbed the champagne bottle off the nearest table and threw it hard. The bottle hit the gunman's face in an explosion of glass and alcohol. He stumbled back, cursing, and Lucien put 2 rounds through his chest before he could recover. The remaining shooter ran. Seraphina stood there breathing hard, her dress splattered with champagne and blood that wasn't hers, staring at the bodies on the floor. Lucien crossed to her in 3 strides. He grabbed her face in both hands, forcing her to look at him instead of the carnage. Are you hurt? She shook her head. Words wouldn't come. Good. He released her and spoke into his phone in rapid-fire Italian. Then he turned back to her. We're leaving. Stay close to me and don't stop moving no matter what you hear. They ran. Through corridors lined with more bodies. Past shattered windows where the rain poured in like accusations. Security teams were engaging hostiles on 3 different floors. The estate had become a war zone. Lucy led her down a staircase she hadn't seen before, descending into what looked like a basement level. The sounds of fighting faded above them. Where are we going? Seraphina gasped. Somewhere they can't follow. He pushed open a heavy door and pulled her into a garage filled with expensive cars. Lucien went straight to a black Audi, opened the passenger door, and shoved her inside. Buckle up. He drove like the devil was chasing them, which maybe he was. The Audi's engine screamed as they flew down the private road away from the estate. Behind them, Seraphina could see flames rising into the rainy sky. Your house is on fire, she said numbly. It's insured. Lucien's eyes were fixed on the road. The people aren't. Who attacked us? Could be Viscari, could be the Russians, could be someone new trying to make a name. He took a corner hard enough to make the tires shriek. Doesn't matter. What matters is they chose tonight specifically. Because of me. Because they think you make me vulnerable. He glanced at her, and for just a second, something like respect crossed his face. They might be wrong about that. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, heading deeper into the industrial district where shipping containers were stacked like building blocks and the streets smelled like diesel and salt water. Finally, Lucien pulled into an underground parking structure beneath a building with no signs. He killed the engine and sat there for a moment, hands still gripping the wheel. Are you going to be sick? He asked. No. Are you going to panic? No. Are you going to ask me if this is normal? Seraphina looked at him, this stranger she'd married 3 hours ago, this killer who'd just saved her life. Would you tell me the truth? Lucien's laugh was harsh and unexpected. Probably not. He got out and came around to open her door. They took an elevator to the top floor, where he unlocked a door to an apartment that looked nothing like the estate. No marble, no art, just clean lines and functional furniture and windows that overlooked the harbor. A safe house. Lucien went straight to a cabinet and pulled out a bottle of something amber. He poured 2 glasses and handed her one. Drink. Seraphina obeyed. The whiskey burned going down but settled the shaking in her hands. How many people died tonight? She asked. I don't know yet. Lucien drained his own glass and poured another. Elena will send me a count in the morning. Just like that? A count? What do you want from me, Seraphina? He turned to face her, and for the first time she saw cracks in that perfect control. Tears? Grief? I've been in this world since I was 16 years old. People die. It's the cost of doing business. That's insane. That's survival. He set down his glass. You want to know what's really insane? Bringing someone like you into this. Someone who throws champagne bottles at armed men instead of running. Someone who doesn't know when to keep her mouth shut around predators like Angelo Messina. You're angry I didn't cower. I'm angry you made me care whether you survived the night. The words came out like an accusation. Seraphina stared at him. You barely know me. I know you're smart enough to be dangerous. I know you don't scare easy. And I know that in my world, those qualities either make you incredibly valuable or get you killed. He moved closer. I haven't decided which yet. Good. Seraphina stood her ground even though every instinct screamed to back away. Because I haven't decided what I think of you either, except that you're a criminal who kills people and trades them like commodities. And somehow, I'm married to you. Yes, you are. Lucien stopped inches from her. And now you need to make a choice. What choice? Whether you want to be a victim in this marriage or a player. His black eyes searched her face. Because I can protect you either way. But only one of those options lets you walk out of here with your soul intact. Seraphina's heart hammered against her ribs. What if I choose player? Then I teach you the rules. I show you how this world actually works. And when the next attack comes, because it will come, you'll know how to survive it without me. He paused. But there's a cost. There's always a cost with you. The cost is this. You stop seeing me as a monster. You start seeing me as human, and once you do that, Lucien's voice dropped to something almost vulnerable. You can't unsee it. You'll understand why I make the choices I make, and that understanding will change you. Rain battered the windows. Somewhere in the city, emergency sirens wailed. Seraphina thought about her father and his debts, about the blood on her wedding dress, about the way Lucien had moved through that firefight like it was choreographed, about his hand on her face, checking for injuries before he allowed himself to breathe. Teach me, she said. Lucien studied her for a long moment. Then he walked to a closet and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. When he unfolded it, she saw metal gleaming in the low light. A handgun. He placed it in her hands. The weight was shocking. First rule, Lucien said. Never hold a weapon unless you're willing to use it. That hesitation gets you killed. Seraphina's fingers curled around the grip. It felt foreign and terrible, and somehow right. Second rule, trust no one completely, not even me, especially not me. Why? Because I'm the most dangerous person you'll ever meet. His smile was sharp as broken glass. But at least I'm honest about it. He spent the next hour showing her how to load, aim, and fire, how to keep her stance stable, how to breathe through the recoil. By the time they finished, Seraphina's arms ached and her ears rang, but she could hit a target at 15 feet. Not bad for a first lesson, Lucien said. When's the second? Tomorrow. If we live that long. He wasn't joking. They ate cold pizza from the safe house refrigerator at 2 a.m, while Lucien fielded phone calls in Italian, Russian, and English. Seraphina listened to him coordinate cleanup operations, manage his remaining security teams, and deploy resources she didn't fully understand. This was the real Lucien D'Aquila. Not the cold figure at the altar, but a man orchestrating a dozen moving pieces across a battlefield while eating pepperoni pizza and checking for updates every 30 seconds. Your father is fine, by the way, he said between calls. I sent him to a hotel in the financial district with 2 bodyguards. Seraphina looked up. You protected him? He's your father. That makes him a resource worth preserving. Lucien's expression was unreadable. Also, keeping him alive gives you a reason to stay cooperative. Everything's a transaction with you. Yes, it is. He didn't apologize. You should sleep. The bedroom's through there. Where will you sleep? I won't. Too much to handle. Seraphina stood and walked to the bedroom door, then stopped and looked back. Lucien? What? Thank you for getting me out. His eyes met hers across the room. You threw a bottle at a man with an automatic weapon. You got yourself out. I just drove. She almost smiled. Liar. Probably. Seraphina closed the bedroom door and leaned against it, listening to the muffled sound of Lucien's voice as he continued making calls. Her wedding dress was ruined, stained with champagne and God knew what else. She peeled it off and found clothes in the closet. Probably Elena's doing, always prepared. When she finally lay down in the unfamiliar bed, she expected to stay awake replaying the violence. Instead, she fell asleep almost immediately, her body shutting down from pure exhaustion. She woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the smell of coffee. Lucien sat at the kitchen counter with his laptop open and a phone pressed to his ear. He'd changed clothes but looked like he hadn't slept at all. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. Understood, he was saying. Triple security on the northern warehouses and tell Dmitri I want eyes on every access point. No, I don't care what it costs, because the next person who breaches my territory dies screaming. That's why. He hung up and noticed Seraphina standing there. Coffee's fresh, he said. She poured herself a cup and joined him at the counter. Through the windows, the harbor sparkled in the morning light like nothing terrible had happened last night. How many? She asked. 14 dead, 23 wounded, 6 attackers killed, 2 captured. Lucien's voice was flat. It was Vescari. We confirmed it an hour ago. Damien Vescari? The one Angelo mentioned? The same. Runs most of the East Coast port operations outside my territory. We've had an agreement for years, but apparently he's decided to renegotiate terms. Lucien closed his laptop. Your wedding was the perfect opportunity. High-profile event, lots of witnesses. If he'd succeeded in killing me, he could have blamed it on rival families and absorbed my infrastructure before anyone retaliated. But he failed. This time, Lucien met her eyes. He'll try again. They always do. Seraphina sipped her coffee, thinking. So what happens now? Now we make an appearance. Show everyone I'm alive, you're alive, and we're not intimidated. He stood and stretched, his shirt pulling tight across his shoulders. There's a gala tonight. Major players from 6 organizations. We're going. Is that smart? Walking into a room full of people who might want you dead? Lucien's smile was predatory. It's the only move that makes sense. If we hide, we look weak. If we show up and act like last night was a minor inconvenience, we look unstoppable. And which one are we? Depends on how good an actress you are. The gala was held in a converted warehouse on the waterfront that had been transformed into something between a nightclub and a throne room. Chandeliers hung from exposed rafters. A full bar stretched along one wall. And everywhere Seraphina looked, she saw dangerous people pretending to be civilized. She wore a black dress this time, Elena's choice again, delivered to the safe house that afternoon. Elegant but severe, the kind of dress that said, I belong here. Lucien wore a tuxedo that probably cost more than most people's cars, and he moved through the crowd like a shark through shallow water. People stepped aside without realizing they were doing it. Remember, he murmured in her ear, everyone's watching. Smile like you're having a wonderful time. Seraphina smiled. They made their way through the room, Lucien shaking hands and exchanging quiet words with men who all looked like they'd killed someone before breakfast. Seraphina stayed close, playing the role of devoted wife while cataloging faces and listening to conversations. Then she saw him, Damien Viscari. He stood near the bar with a champagne flute in one hand and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Early 40s, handsome in an expensive way, with slicked back hair and a suit that screamed money. The man who'd ordered the attack on their wedding. Lucien. Viscari raised his glass in greeting. I heard about the excitement last night. Terrible business. I'm glad you're both safe. Lucien's expression didn't change. Are you? Of course. Attacks like that are bad for everyone. Creates instability, draws attention. Viscari's eyes slid to Seraphina. And who is this lovely creature? My wife, Lucien D'Aquila. Ah yes, the transaction everyone's been talking about. Viscari extended his hand. Seraphina shook it, resisting the urge to crush his fingers. Mr. Viscari, I've heard so much about you. Nothing good, I hope. His smile widened. Lucien and I have a complicated relationship. Is that what we're calling it? Lucien's voice was ice. Tension crackled between them like electricity before a storm. Every person within 20 feet had gone quiet, watching. Seraphina felt Lucien's hand settle on her lower back, a warning to stay silent. But something in Viscari's smug expression made her ignore it. Actually, Mr. Viscari, she said pleasantly, I wanted to thank you. Both men looked at her. Thank me? Viscari's eyebrows rose. For what? For the wedding gift? Seraphina's smile was all teeth. Most people send crystal or silver, but you sent armed men to kill us. Much more memorable. Really made the night special. The silence that followed was absolute. Viscari's expression hardened. Careful, Mrs. D'Aquila. You're very new to this world. Accusations are dangerous. So are lies. But here we are, surrounded by both. Seraphina tilted her head. Tell me, when you planned the attack, did you really think Lucien would go down that easily? Or were you just hoping we'd be too distracted celebrating to notice your men breaching the perimeter? Viscari's hand tightened on his glass. You have no idea what you're talking about, don't I? Because it seems to me that someone who'd been planning this for months would have done better reconnaissance, would have known about the secondary security protocols, would have realized that attacking during a wedding just makes you look desperate. She paused. And sloppy. Someone nearby actually gasped. Lucien's hand pressed harder against her back, but he didn't stop her. Viscari's face had gone red. You little... Choose your next words carefully, Damien. Lucien's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Because if you finish that sentence, I'll finish this conversation in a way you won't enjoy. For a long moment, Viscari looked like he might explode. Then he forced himself to smile and turned to address the watching crowd. Lucien's new bride has quite the mouth on her, he said loudly. Let's hope it doesn't write checks her husband can't cash. He walked away, taking his entourage with him. The crowd slowly returned to their conversations, but Seraphina could feel eyes tracking her from every direction. Some curious, some hostile, all assessing. Lucien leaned down to whisper in her ear, "We need to talk, now." He guided her toward a private alcove away from the main floor. As soon as they were alone, he rounded on her. "What the hell was that?" "That was me not cowering in front of the man who tried to kill us." "That was you painting a target on your back." Lucien's control was cracking. "Do you have any idea what you just did? You publicly accused one of the most powerful men on the East Coast of attempted murder, in front of witnesses. Good. Let him know we're not afraid. We should be afraid. Viscari doesn't play games, Seraphina. He ends them." Lucien ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I told you to stay quiet and what? Smile and nod while he gloated about trying to murder us?" Seraphina stepped closer. "You said you'd teach me the rules. Well, here's what I learned. These people respect strength, not silence. You want them to see me as an asset instead of a liability? Then I can't act like a victim." Lucien stared at her, something complicated working behind his eyes. "You're either very brave or very stupid," he said finally. "Maybe both." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That's what I'm afraid of." Before Seraphina could respond, gunfire erupted from the main floor. Not again. Lucien's hand was on her arm before the second shot rang out, dragging her down behind a marble column as the crowd erupted into screaming chaos. Bodies hit the floor, some diving for cover, others not getting up. The chandeliers swayed overhead from the vibration of running feet. "Stay down," Lucien growled, already pulling his weapon from the shoulder holster hidden beneath his tuxedo jacket. Seraphina pressed her back against the cold marble, her heart slamming against her ribs. Through the gaps in the panicking crowd, she could see muzzle flashes near the entrance. 3 shooters, maybe 4, firing in controlled bursts. This wasn't random. This was surgical. "Is this Viscari again?" she managed. "Don't know. Don't care." Lucien's eyes were tracking movement, calculating angles. "When I move, you run for the kitchen exit, straight back past the bar, through the service corridor." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you." He glanced at her, and for half a second something almost human flickered across his face. "Don't stop. Don't look back. Just run." Then he was up and firing, drawing the shooter's attention away from the civilians still scrambling for exits. Seraphina bolted. Her heels slipped on the polished floor as she ran, so she kicked them off without breaking stride. Behind her, gunfire intensified. Someone screamed, glass shattered. She didn't look back. The kitchen doors burst open under her shoulder, industrial steel tables, hanging pots, 2 terrified caterers huddled behind a refrigerator. "Exit?" Seraphina gasped. One of them pointed to a door marked with a glowing red sign. She was halfway there when the kitchen doors exploded inward and a man in tactical gear came through with a submachine gun. Not Lucien. Enemy. Seraphina grabbed a cast-iron skillet off the nearest prep station and threw it with everything she had. The pan caught him in the shoulder, throwing off his aim as he fired. Bullets stitched across the ceiling, raining plaster dust. Then Lucien was there, putting 3 rounds through the shooter's chest before he could recover. "I said run!" Lucien shouted at her. "I did run. He followed." "Then run faster." They crashed through the exit into an alley that smelled like rotting fish and diesel exhaust. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking them instantly. Lucien pulled her left, toward where the alley opened onto a street lined with warehouses. More gunfire behind them, boots splashing through puddles. "How many?" Seraphina panted. "Too many." Lucien fired blind over his shoulder, not bothering to aim, just buying them seconds. "Car's 2 blocks north. Stay with me." They ran through the maze of alleys between the warehouses, Lucien navigating by memory while Seraphina's feet screamed against the wet pavement. Her dress was plastered to her body, restricting movement. She grabbed the hem and ripped it to the thigh just to keep running. A black SUV screeched around the corner ahead of them, blocking their path. For one terrible moment, Seraphina thought it was more attackers. Then Elena's voice crackled from the driver's window. "Get in!" They dove into the back seat as bullets sparked off the SUV's armored panels. Elena floored it before Lucien even got the door closed, throwing them backward as the vehicle fishtailed onto the main road. Northern Safe House, Lucien ordered, breathing hard. And get me Anton on the phone. Elena tossed him a cell without taking her eyes off the road. She drove like she was running the Daytona 500, weaving through traffic and blowing red lights while Seraphina tried to catch her breath. Anton, it's me, Lucien said into the phone. His voice had gone cold and flat. I need a full accounting of every operation in the city. Someone knew we'd be at that gala. No, not Vescari's style. Too reckless. I don't care about possibilities. I want names. 40 minutes. Have everyone assembled. He hung up and looked at Seraphina. Really looked at her, checking for injuries with an intensity that was almost medical. You hit? She shook her head. You? No. His jaw tightened. That's twice in 2 days someone's tried to kill us. That's not coincidence. That's coordination. Meaning what? Meaning someone inside my organization is feeding information to our enemies. Lucien's eyes were black ice. And when I find them, I'm going to make them regret being born. The Northern Safe House turned out to be a penthouse suite in one of the high-rises overlooking the financial district. 70 floors up, with bulletproof glass and security systems that probably cost more than most people's mortgages. Anton was waiting when they arrived, a massive Russian with a shaved head and knuckles like ball bearings. He stood when they entered, his expression grim. Boss, Mrs. D'Aquila. He nodded to each of them. Everyone's downstairs in the conference room. Dimitri's running the technical sweep now. Good. Lucien shrugged out of his destroyed tuxedo jacket and tossed it over a chair. Seraphina, you should clean up and rest. This is going to take hours. No. He turned slowly. No? You said you'd teach me how this world works. Well, this is how it works, right? Hunting traitors? Finding leaks? Seraphina crossed her arms. I want to be there. This isn't a classroom lecture. These are interrogations. They get ugly. I don't care. Lucien studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Fine. But if I tell you to leave, you leave. Understood? Understood. The conference room was in the building's sub-basement, behind 3 sets of locked doors and a retinal scanner. Inside, 11 men and 2 women sat around a table that looked like it belonged in a corporate boardroom. These were Lucien's inner circle, the people who ran his empire's day-to-day operations. They all stood when Lucien entered. Sit. He took the chair at the head of the table. Seraphina stood against the wall, trying to be invisible. We have a problem. Someone in this organization is selling information to hostile parties. That's the only explanation for 2 coordinated attacks in 48 hours. The room erupted in protests and denials. Impossible. None of us would. Must be external surveillance. Lucien raised one hand and silence fell like a guillotine blade. I'm not interested in protests. I'm interested in facts. He nodded to a thin man with glasses sitting at the far end. Dimitri. Technical analysis. Dimitri opened a laptop and projected data onto the screen behind Lucien. Both attacks showed detailed knowledge of our security protocols. The wedding assault team knew about our blind spots in the eastern perimeter. Tonight's shooters timed their entry to coincide with a shift change in our external security detail. That information exists in exactly 7 places. He highlighted names on the screen. These 7 people have access to full security briefings. Seraphina scanned the names. 3 were in this room. One of them was Anton. The big Russian's face had gone carefully neutral. Anton, Lucien said quietly, you've been with me for 12 years, saved my life in Moscow, took a bullet for me in Prague. He paused. Give me one reason not to put you against that wall right now. Anton didn't flinch. Because I didn't do it. I'd cut my own throat before I'd betray you, Lucien. You know that. What I know is that you've been spending a lot of time with your cousin lately, the one who works for Vescari's import division. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Alexei, Anton's voice cracked. He's family. We have dinner once a month. We talk about football and his kids. Nothing about business. Are you certain? On my mother's grave. Lucien's expression didn't change. Your mother's still alive, Anton. Then on my own grave, I swear to you, boss. It's not me. Seraphina watched the exchange, reading the micro-expressions that flickered across Anton's face. Fear, anger. But underneath it all, genuine confusion. Either he was the world's best actor, or he was telling the truth. Lucien must have seen it too, because he shifted his attention to the woman sitting 2 seats down from Anton. "Teresa, you've been unusually quiet." Teresa looked up. Mid-40s, severe features, hair pulled back in a tight bun. She ran Lucien's port operations, the legitimate side of his business that served as cover for everything else. "What would you like me to say?" Her voice was steady. "I didn't leak anything. My security clearance exists because I need it to do my job, that's all. Your sister works for the Port Authority. She has access to shipping manifests and customs schedules. My sister and I haven't spoken in 6 years. She thinks I'm a glorified accountant for a construction company." Teresa's hands were flat on the table, fingers spread. "If you think I'm the leak, Lucien, then do what you need to do. But you're wrong." Another denial, another face that seemed genuine. Seraphina felt the frustration building in the room like pressure before an explosion. These people were loyal, or at least most of them were, but someone had talked. Someone had sold them out. The interrogations continued for 3 hours. Each person in the room was questioned, their movements tracked, their contacts examined. Dmitri pulled financial records, phone logs, travel histories. They were looking for anything, a large unexplained deposit, a secret meeting, a suspicious pattern. They found nothing. By the time they broke for the night, everyone in that room looked exhausted and paranoid. Trust had been shattered. Even if they found the traitor, the damage was already done. Lucien dismissed them one by one until only he, Seraphina, and Anton remained. "I want you to disappear your cousin," Lucien said to Anton. "Quietly. Take him somewhere secure and find out what he knows. I don't care how you do it." Anton's face went gray. "Lucien, he's family, I understand that. But if he's the connection, we need to know." Lucien's voice softened a fraction. "I'm not asking you to hurt him, just get the truth. And if he's clean, then we keep looking." Anton nodded stiffly and left. Seraphina waited until the door closed. "You don't think it's him?" "No, Anton's too valuable to risk for whatever Viscari's paying, and too loyal." Lucien rubbed his eyes. "But I had to give him something to focus on. Otherwise, he'd spend the next week watching his own back instead of doing his job." "So who is it?" "I don't know. The admission seemed to cost him. That's what scares me." They took the elevator back up to the penthouse. The city spread out below them through the floor-to-ceiling windows, millions of lights that made it look almost beautiful instead of the battlefield it actually was. Seraphina found the bathroom and finally got a look at herself in the mirror. Her dress was destroyed, torn, and stained with who knew what. Her makeup was smeared. Her feet were cut and bleeding from running barefoot. She looked like a survivor. The shower was hot enough to sting. She stood under the spray for 20 minutes, washing away blood and rain and the smell of cordite, and tried not to think about the bodies on that ballroom floor. Some of them had probably been innocent, caterers, servers, people just trying to earn a paycheck. Dead because they were in the wrong place when violence came calling. When she emerged wrapped in a towel, she found Elena had left clothes on the bed. Dark jeans, a black sweater, combat boots in her size. No more evening gowns. The message was clear. You're at war now. Dress accordingly. Lucien was standing at the windows when she came out, still in his blood-spattered dress shirt and slacks, staring down at the city like he could find answers in the geometry of streets. You should sleep, he said without turning around. So should you. Can't. Too much to think about. Seraphina joined him at the window. This close, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes. He looked older than 34. He looked ancient. Tell me something, she said. Is it always like this? Like what? Violent, chaotic. People trying to kill you every 48 hours. Lucien was quiet for a moment. No. Usually there's more time between attacks. A few weeks at least. This is unusual. Because of me. Because someone thinks you make me vulnerable. He finally looked at her. Do you? The question hung between them like a challenge. Seraphina thought about the past 3 days. The forced marriage, the gunfights, the interrogations. This man had dragged her into his nightmare and expected her to survive it without breaking. But he'd also taught her to shoot, protected her father, trusted her enough to let her sit in on his inner circle's crisis meeting. I don't know, she said honestly. Do I? Lucien's laugh was harsh. That's the problem. I don't know either. He turned back to the window. I've spent 20 years building this empire. 20 years learning not to care about anything that could be used against me. And then your father gambles himself into a hole, and suddenly I'm married to someone who throws champagne bottles at armed men and calls out Damien Vescari in front of 100 witnesses. You're angry about that. I'm terrified about that. The words came out raw. Because you're either going to get yourself killed or you're going to change everything. And I don't know which scares me more. Seraphina felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't the cold crime lord or the calculating strategist. This was just a man who'd been alone so long he'd forgotten how to let someone in. Lucien, his phone buzzed. He checked it and his expression went dark. What is it? Anton found his cousin. Alexei's been dead for 3 days. Someone made it look like a heart attack, but the coroner flagged inconsistencies. Lucien's knuckles were white around the phone. He was killed the day before our wedding, so he couldn't have leaked the information about tonight's gala, which means Anton's off the list, but it also means someone murdered Alexei specifically to cast suspicion on Anton. Lucien started pacing like a caged animal. This isn't just a leak. This is psychological warfare. Someone's trying to tear apart my organization from the inside. Who benefits from that? Everyone. Vescari, the Russians, the Colombians. Hell, even some of my own people if they think they can grab power in the chaos. He stopped pacing and looked at her. We need to disappear, both of us. Go completely dark until I can figure out who's behind this. For how long? However long it takes. Seraphina thought about that, hiding in safe houses, running from shadows, living in constant fear. That wasn't survival. That was just dying slowly. No, she said. Lucien's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? I said no, we're not running. This isn't a negotiation, Seraphina. Someone inside my organization wants us dead badly enough to orchestrate 2 public attacks and murder an innocent man. We disappear until what? Until they get bored? Until they make a mistake? She stepped closer to him. You said these people respect strength, not weakness. What message does it send if we hide? It sends the message that we're smart enough to stay alive. It sends the message that we're scared. Seraphina could feel her pulse hammering, but she kept her voice steady. You want to know if I make you vulnerable? Here's your answer, only if you let me. But if you trust me, really trust me, then I can be an asset. I can help you find this traitor. How exactly would you do that? By doing what I did tonight. By making them react. Her mind was already racing through possibilities. Whoever's behind this, they're expecting you to hunker down and play defense. So we do the opposite. We go on offense, we make them nervous, and nervous people make mistakes. Lucien stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. That's insane. You married me, remember? Insanity comes with the package. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lucien's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile if it wasn't so sharp. You know what the really terrifying part is? He said quietly. I'm actually considering it. Consider faster. We're running out of time. He studied her face, searching for something. Whatever he found made him nod slowly. Fine. We do it your way. But there are rules. I'm listening. First, you don't make a move without telling me. No improvising, no heroics, no throwing bottles at people with guns. That worked, didn't it? It gave me a heart attack. Rule 1 stands. He held up a second finger. Second, you learn to actually use the weapons I'm giving you. If we're walking into danger, I need to know you can handle yourself. Agreed. Third, he paused, something vulnerable flickering across his expression. If I tell you to run, you run. No arguments, no looking back. You save yourself even if it means leaving me behind. Seraphina felt her throat tighten. Lucien, that's the rule, Seraphina. I can handle dying. I've made peace with that. But I can't handle watching you die because you were too stubborn to save yourself. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. Promise me. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she wasn't leaving him behind no matter what. But the look in his eyes stopped her. I promise, she lied. Lucien searched her face and seemed to accept it. Good. Then let's get to work. They spent the next 4 hours planning. Lucien pulled up files on every major player in the city's criminal infrastructure, their operations, their weaknesses, their ambitions. He explained the ecosystem of alliances and grudges that held this violent world in balance. The key, he said, pointing to a network diagram on his laptop, is understanding that everyone needs everyone else. Vescuri controls the ports, but he needs my shipping routes. The Russians move product, but they need my distribution network. The Colombians supply the drugs, but they need protection from federal interdiction. So it's all interdependent. Exactly. Which means whoever's trying to kill us isn't trying to take over. They're trying to create chaos. And in chaos, he trailed off. Someone swoops in and consolidates power, Seraphina finished. Someone positioned to benefit from the collapse of the existing structure. Now you're thinking like them. Lucien pulled up another file. So who fits that profile? They went through the list one by one, eliminating names. Too loyal, too weak, too invested in the status quo. By dawn, they'd narrowed it down to 3 possibilities. Damien Vescari, the obvious choice, but maybe too obvious. Victor Constantine, a Russian oligarch with fingers in legitimate business and deep ties to Moscow intelligence. And James Harrington, a lawyer who represented half the major players and had access to everyone's secrets. My money's on Harrington, Seraphina said, studying his file. He's positioned perfectly. Access to everyone's operations, trust from all sides, and if he's selling information to the highest bidder, he'd be invisible, Lucien finished. No one suspects the lawyer. So how do we prove it? Lucien leaned back in his chair, thinking. The sky outside was starting to lighten, painting the city in shades of gray and gold. We give him a test, he said finally. Feed him information that only he would have access to. Then see if that information ends up in the wrong hands. What kind of information? The kind that would be too valuable to ignore. A location, a meeting, something that would draw out our enemies if they knew about it. His eyes met hers. And when they come, we'll be ready. Seraphina felt ice slide down her spine. You're talking about using ourselves as bait. I'm talking about ending this before someone succeeds in killing us. Lucien's voice was steel-wrapped in exhaustion. You said we should go on offense. This is what offense looks like. She wanted to argue, wanted to find a safer plan, but deep down she knew he was right. They couldn't keep reacting to attacks. They had to force the enemy into the open. What do you need me to do? There's a charity benefit tomorrow night. High society, lots of cameras, very public. Harrington will be there representing some of his legitimate clients. Lucien pulled up details on his laptop. We show up together, we make a scene, and we let it slip that we're meeting with someone important the following evening at the waterfront warehouse district. Let it slip how? Loud conversation near Harrington, argument about security. You saying it's too dangerous, me insisting we have to take the meeting. He looked at her. Think you can sell it? I've been selling being okay for the past week. I think I can manage fake fear. It can't be fake. Harrington's smart. He'll spot a performance. It has to be real enough to be believable. Seraphina thought about that. Then make me actually afraid. Tell me something real. Something that would make any sane person want to run. Lucien was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, The warehouse district is where we dump the bodies from the wedding attack. It's controlled territory, but it's also exposed. If Harrington passes that information along, whoever comes for us will have multiple firing positions and easy escape routes. We'll be sitting ducks. And you're okay with that? No, but I don't see another option. He met her eyes. This is what I meant about changing you, Seraphina. Once you start thinking tactically about survival, about acceptable casualties and calculated risks, there's no going back to being innocent. She felt the weight of his words settle over her like a shroud. He was right. The woman who'd walked down that aisle in a blood-red dress 6 days ago would have been horrified by this conversation, would have run screaming from a plan that involved deliberately walking into an ambush. But that woman had died somewhere between the champagne bottles and the interrogation room. I'm already changed, she said quietly. The question is whether I'm changed enough to survive this. That, Lucien said, is what we're about to find out. The charity benefit was held at the Metropolitan Museum. Black tie optional, champagne mandatory, and enough old money in attendance to fund a small country. Seraphina wore emerald green silk that Elena had somehow procured on 2 hours' notice. Lucien was back in a tuxedo, looking like he hadn't slept in 3 days, which was accurate. They arrived separately, Lucien through the main entrance, Seraphina through a side door, to maintain the illusion that they weren't completely joined at the hip. But within 10 minutes, they'd found each other near the Greco-Roman wing where someone was boring a crowd with analysis of 3rd century pottery. "There," Lucien murmured, tilting his head fractionally to the left. "By the statue of Apollo. Navy suit." Seraphina followed his gaze and spotted James Harrington. Late 50s, distinguished gray hair, the kind of face that inspired trust. He was chatting with a woman in pearls, completely at ease. "Now?" she whispered. "Give it 20 minutes. Let him settle in, lower his guard, then we make our move." Those 20 minutes felt like hours. Seraphina circulated through the crowd, making small talk with people who smiled too much and asked careful questions about her marriage. Everyone wanted to know about Lucien's mysterious new wife. She gave them nothing useful. Finally, Lucien appeared at her elbow and steered her toward the hall where Harrington was now standing alone, checking his phone. "This is insane," Lucien said, voice pitched just loud enough to carry. "You're not going anywhere near the waterfront tomorrow night." Seraphina pulled her arm free. "It's not your decision. Marco specifically asked for both of us to be there. Marco can meet me at a location of my choosing, not some exposed warehouse in hostile territory. He won't accept that. You know how he is. Everything on his terms or no deal." She was amazed at how easily the lies flowed. "If we don't show, we lose the alliance with the Colombians. If we do show, we might lose our lives." Lucien's jaw was tight. 2 attacks in a week, Seraphina. Someone's hunting us. Walking into that warehouse is suicide. Out of the corner of her eye, Seraphina saw Harrington glance their way. Good. He was listening. "So what's your alternative?" she demanded. "Hide forever? Let them win? Let them make a mistake. Let them get sloppy." Lucien's voice dropped to something almost pleading. "I'm asking you to trust me on this. Cancel the meeting." "I can't. It's already set. 9 p.m. tomorrow. Warehouse 12 in the commercial district." She emphasized the details, making sure Harrington could hear every word. "We show up, we make the deal, and we leave. Simple." "Nothing about this is simple." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you married me." She turned and walked away, leaving Lucien standing there with an expression that could have been real anger or perfect acting. Seraphina made it to the ladies' room before her hands started shaking. She'd just painted a target on both their backs, delivered the bait right into Harrington's lap. And if she was wrong, if he wasn't the traitor, they just announced their location to whoever actually was. The bathroom door opened and a woman entered. Older, elegant, with eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. "That was quite a performance," the woman said. Seraphina's blood ran cold. "I'm sorry?" "The argument with your husband. Very convincing." The woman checked her makeup in the mirror. "Although if I were you, I'd be more careful about where I had those discussions. You never know who might be listening." She left before Seraphina could respond. The rest of the benefit passed in a blur of paranoia and forced smiles. By the time they left, Seraphina's face hurt from holding the mask in place. Elena drove them back to the penthouse in silence. Only when they were inside, doors locked and security active, did Lucien speak. He took the bait. "Harrington made 3 phone calls within 10 minutes of our argument. Dimitri's trying to trace them now. That woman in the bathroom, she knew. She said I should be more careful about who's listening." "Describe her." Seraphina did in as much detail as she could remember. Lucien's expression went dark. "Catherine Volkov, Victor Konstantin's sister. She's not officially part of the organization, but everyone knows she's his eyes and ears in high society. So the Russians know too. Or Catherine's just smart enough to recognize a staged argument when she sees one." He poured himself a drink. "Either way, word's going to spread. By tomorrow morning, half the city will know we're meeting someone at Warehouse 12. Is that good or bad? Depends on who shows up to kill us." Seraphina sank into a chair, exhaustion finally catching up with her. "How do you live like this? Constantly calculating who's lying, who's listening, who's going to stab you in the back. You get used to it. The paranoia becomes background noise." "That sounds like hell." "It is." Lucien sat across from her. "But it's also the only way to survive. The moment you trust someone completely, the moment you let your guard down, that's when they destroy you." "Is that what you think I'm going to do?" Destroy you? He took a long drink before answering. I think you already are, just not in the way I expected. Before Seraphina could ask what he meant, Dmitri burst through the door without knocking, laptop in hand. We traced one of Harrington's calls, he said breathlessly. Burner phone registered to a shell company, but we tracked the physical location where the call was received. Where? Lucien was already on his feet. Vescari's private office, downtown tower, 42nd floor. Dmitri pulled up surveillance footage. And 20 minutes ago, Vescari himself left the building with 6 of his top security people. They're mobilizing. Lucien and Seraphina exchanged looks. Tomorrow night's going to be a bloodbath, she said quietly. Yes, Lucien's voice was grim. Which means we need to be ready. Dmitri, I want sniper positions on every building with line of sight to Warehouse 12. Anton handles ground teams. Elena coordinates extraction routes. If this goes wrong, I want multiple ways out. And if it goes right, Dmitri asked. If it goes right, we end this war before it destroys us all. The next 24 hours passed in frantic preparation. Lucien's people moved through the city like ghosts, setting up firing positions and escape routes while trying not to draw attention. Anton coordinated with teams Seraphina didn't even know existed. Elena prepared 3 different vehicles in 3 different locations. Through it all, Seraphina trained. Lucien took her to a private range in the sub-basement and put a gun in her hands. For 6 hours, she practiced, loading, firing, reloading, firing again until her arms ached and her ears rang despite the protection. You're pulling left, Lucien said, watching her sight down the range, compensating for anticipated recoil. Don't think about what happens after you pull the trigger. Just focus on the moment before. She adjusted her stance and fired again. The target's center mass took the hit. Better? Again. By the time they finished, Seraphina could hit a man-sized target at 25 yards consistently. Not expert level, but good enough to survive. Maybe. You're a natural, Lucien said, clearly surprised. Most people take weeks to get to this level. I'm motivated. Death is a hell of a teacher. He almost smiled. That it is. They grabbed takeout on the way back to the penthouse. Chinese food from a place that Elena swore was clean. They ate in silence, both of them too aware of what was coming to make small talk. Finally, Seraphina set down her chopsticks. Can I ask you something? Depends on the question. Why did you really agree to marry me? I know my father owed you money, but you could have just killed him, or taken everything he owned. Why this? Lucien was quiet for a long time, staring at his food like it held answers. Because I was tired, he said finally. Tired of building an empire alone. Tired of not being able to trust anyone enough to share it with. And when I saw your picture, when I read your file and learned about your work overseas, your languages, your strategic mind, I thought maybe what? Maybe there was someone in this world who could stand beside me instead of behind me. He met her eyes. I didn't expect you to be so damn stubborn about it. Seraphina felt something crack open in her chest. Is that what tomorrow night is about? Testing whether I can really stand beside you? Tomorrow night is about survival, but yes, it's also a test, for both of us. He reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused. If we survive this, everything changes. We'll have proved we can fight as a unit, that we're stronger together than apart. And if we don't survive? Then at least we died fighting instead of hiding. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to her. That night, Seraphina couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark bedroom listening to the city hum 40 stories below and thought about all the choices that had led her here. Her father's gambling, the forced marriage, the decision to stay instead of run. Every choice had seemed impossible at the time. Every choice had led her closer to this moment. Around 3 a.m., her door opened quietly. Lucien stood silhouetted in the light from the hallway. Can't sleep either? She asked. No. He stepped inside but didn't close the door. I wanted to tell you something, in case tomorrow goes wrong. Seraphina sat up. What? I'm glad it was you. The words came out rough, like they'd been dragged from somewhere deep. I've married a lot of things in my life, alliances, businesses, strategies, but you're the first person I ever married, and despite everything, despite the violence and the fear and the absolute insanity of this situation, I'm glad my father's debt brought you to me. Her breath caught. Lucien, hey, don't say anything. I just needed you to know. He started to leave, then stopped. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be hell. Then he was gone, and Seraphina was alone in the dark with words she couldn't say and feelings she didn't know how to name. At 8 p.m. the following evening, they gathered in the penthouse one last time. Lucien wore tactical gear under a long coat. Seraphina had a vest that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds and a Glock holstered at her hip that Elena had made her test fire 100 times. Last chance to back out, Lucien said. Not a chance. Anton appeared with final updates. Snipers in position, ground teams ready. We've got 3 extraction routes prepped. Dimitri's monitoring all communications in case anyone calls it off. They won't call it off. Lucien checked his own weapon one final time. This is too good an opportunity. They think we're walking in blind. Aren't we? Seraphina asked. Blind? Lucien's smile was sharp as a knife. No. We're walking in with our eyes wide open. There's a difference. They took separate vehicles to the warehouse district. Lucien went in the armored SUV with Anton. Seraphina rode with Elena and 2 security personnel she'd never met. The woman drove like she was running from God himself, weaving through traffic and taking shortcuts that probably weren't legal. The warehouse district at night looked like a graveyard of commerce. Massive buildings squatted in the darkness, windows empty as dead eyes. Shipping containers were stacked like building blocks between the structures. Perfect cover for an ambush. They parked 2 blocks from Warehouse 12 and proceeded on foot. Seraphina's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might bruise. Lucien appeared from the shadows, materializing like a ghost. Ready? No, but let's do it anyway. They walked toward the warehouse together. Behind them, invisible in the darkness, Lucien's teams moved into position. Ahead, the warehouse doors hung open like a mouth. They were 50 feet from the entrance when Seraphina heard it. The metallic click of safeties being released. Multiple weapons. Multiple directions. Down! Lucien screamed, tackling her to the ground as gunfire erupted from every direction at once. This wasn't an ambush. This was an execution. Bullets tore through the air above them, sparking off concrete and punching through metal. Seraphina could hear Lucien's teams returning fire, could hear shouted commands in 3 different languages. But there were too many attackers. Way too many. Move! Lucien hauled her to her feet, and they ran for the nearest shipping container. Bullets chased them, biting at their heels. They dove behind the container just as a grenade exploded where they'd been standing 2 seconds before. This is wrong, Lucien gasped, blood running from a cut on his temple. This isn't just Vescari. This is everyone. Every organization in the city is here. And that's when Seraphina understood. This wasn't about killing them. It was about making sure they could never threaten the status quo, about making sure the woman who challenged Vescari and the man who wanted to change the rules both disappeared before they could shake the foundations of this violent world. They'd walked into a trap built by everyone. We need to go, she said. Now. But when they looked toward their escape route, they saw men in tactical gear blocking every exit, saw muzzle flashes from the rooftops where Lucien's snipers should have been. They were surrounded. They were outnumbered. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Seraphina saw something she'd never seen on Lucien's face before. Fear. Not for himself. For her. Listen to me, he said, gripping her shoulders. When I start firing, you run, straight north, through that gap between containers. Don't stop, don't look back, just no. Seraphina pulled out her Glock. We fight together or we die together. Those are the only options. Seraphina, together. She saw him struggle with it, saw him wanting to argue, to force her to safety. Then he nodded once. Together. They came out shooting. The first 3 shots came from Seraphina's Glock before she even registered pulling the trigger. Muscle memory from those 6 hours on the range with Lucien screaming in her ear. The nearest attacker went down clutching his shoulder. Not a kill shot, but enough to make him stop shooting at them. Lucien moved like violence incarnate beside her, his movements economical and brutally efficient. 2 shots, 2 bodies. He wasn't aiming to wound. They ran. Between shipping containers that smelled like rust and ocean salt, boots pounding on cracked asphalt while bullets chased them like angry hornets. Seraphina's lungs burned. The tactical vest felt like it was crushing her rib cage. "Left!" Lucien shouted, yanking her around a corner as an explosion tore through the container they'd been standing beside 2 seconds earlier. Metal shrieked. Fire bloomed in the darkness. They emerged into a clearing between warehouses, and Seraphina saw their backup vehicles. 3 SUVs positioned exactly where Elena had promised, engulfed in flames. Someone had hit them with incendiaries before the shooting even started. No escape routes. No backup plan. Just them and approximately 50 armed men who wanted them dead. "The water!" Lucien gasped, pointing toward the docks barely visible through the maze of containers. "If we can reach the harbor." Gunfire erupted from that direction too. They were boxed in completely. Lucien grabbed her hand and pulled her into the nearest warehouse through a door hanging off its hinges. Inside was darkness and the smell of rot. Empty pallets, abandoned machinery, rats scurrying in the corners. They pressed against a wall, breathing hard, listening to boots, and shouted commands outside. "How many bullets do you have left?" Lucien whispered. Seraphina checked her magazine. 6. "I've got 11. His voice was clinical, already doing calculations. "That's 17 shots against 50 men. The math doesn't work." "Then we need to change the math." "How?" Before she could answer, lights blazed to life throughout the warehouse. Industrial floods that turned night into harsh white day and left them completely exposed, standing in the middle of the empty floor. Seraphina raised her weapon, spinning to track threats. Men poured in through every entrance. 20, 30, more. All armed, all pointed at them. And walking through the main doors, flanked by security that probably cost more than most people earned in a year, came Damien Viscari. But he wasn't alone. Beside him walked James Harrington, and Victor Constantine, and Angelo Messina, and a dozen other faces Seraphina recognized from Lucien's files. Every major player in the city's criminal infrastructure. They'd all come personally to watch this execution. "Lower your weapons," Viscari called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "It's over, Lucien. You're surrounded, outnumbered, and out of options. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Lucien's gun never wavered. "You want us dead. You'll have to earn it." "Oh, we will. But first, I think you deserve to understand why." Viscari gestured and his men parted, creating a path. Through that path walked a woman in an expensive black suit, her severe features composed and unreadable. "Elena." Seraphina's world tilted sideways. "No," she heard herself say. "No, that's not. I'm sorry, Mrs. D'Aquila." Elena's voice was the same as always, controlled, professional, utterly devoid of emotion. But this was always how it had to end. Lucien's face had gone absolutely blank. Not shocked, not betrayed, just empty, like someone had reached inside and scooped out everything human. "How long?" His voice was a whisper that somehow carried across the warehouse. "From the beginning." Elena stepped closer, hands clasped in front of her like she was reporting on household matters. "Your father hired me 23 years ago specifically to watch you, to make sure his empire would survive his death. And when you started talking about change, about evolution, about transforming the organization into something legitimate," she shook her head. "That couldn't be allowed. My father's been dead for 8 years. Yes. And I've spent those 8 years making sure his vision didn't die with him." Elena's expression finally shifted, just a flicker of something that might have been regret. "You were never supposed to marry, Lucien, never supposed to bring in an outsider who might actually convince you that there was another way. When Marcus Vale walked into my office 6 months ago, desperate to settle his gambling debts, I saw an opportunity." 6 months. The words hit Seraphina like a physical blow. "What?" she managed. Elena turned to her, and for the first time, Seraphina saw pity in those cold eyes. "Your father didn't gamble away $7 million, Mrs. D'Aquila. We gave him $7 million, set him up with rigged games, crooked dealers, and the illusion that he was on a winning streak. Then we took it all back and offered him the only solution that would let him survive." "You set him up, set me up." Seraphina could barely breathe. "Why?" "Because Lucien was becoming dangerous. Talking about alliances instead of territories, about economic partnerships instead of violent enforcement. The other families were getting nervous. They hired me to provide a solution. Elena's voice was matter of fact, like she was explaining a business transaction. I gave them you. Viscari laughed from his position near the door. She's quite brilliant, actually. Convinced us that the best way to destroy Lucien D'Aquila wasn't to kill him. It was to make him care about something, to give him a weakness we could exploit, a wife who would distract him, soften him, make him vulnerable. The attacks, Lucien said slowly, pieces falling into place. The wedding, the gala. You organized them. I facilitated them, Elena corrected. Gave Mr. Viscari your security protocols. Provided Mr. Constantine with your schedule. Made sure every detail was leaked to the right people at the right time. She paused. But you surprised me. Both of you. I expected Mrs. D'Aquila to break within days, to become a liability that would force you into protective mode, make you defensive and weak. Instead, she threw champagne bottles at armed men and called out Damien in front of witnesses. And I made the mistake of thinking she was an asset instead of a trap. Lucien's voice was hollow. Not a mistake, an inevitability. Elena stepped closer to them, and Seraphina noticed for the first time that the older woman looked tired, worn down. I raised you, Lucien. Changed your diapers, taught you to read, watched you grow from a scared boy into the most dangerous man I've ever known. And I'm sorry, truly sorry, that it has to end this way. But your father built something that matters, something worth preserving, and I won't let you destroy it by making it legitimate. The warehouse had gone completely silent. 50 armed men watching this confession like it was theater. Seraphina felt rage building in her chest, hot and sharp. My father, where is he? Elena met her eyes. At the hotel where Lucien sent him, safe, under protection. I made sure of that. When this is over, he'll be told you both died in a tragic accident. His debt will be forgiven. He'll live out his life never knowing what role he played. How merciful, Seraphina spat. It is, actually. More mercy than most people in this business receive. Enough. Victor Constantine stepped forward, his accent thick as vodka. You've had your moment of drama, Elena. Now finish it. We have schedules to keep. Elena nodded and turned to her security team, men Seraphina had seen every day for the past week, men she'd thought were protecting them. Make it quick. No suffering. They deserve that much. Weapons raised. Seraphina's hand found Lucien's, their fingers interlaced. If this was the end, at least they'd face it together. Wait. Lucien's voice cut through the moment like a blade. You think you've won. You think killing us preserves what my father built. But you're wrong. Am I? Elena raised an eyebrow. My father built an empire through fear and violence because that was the only language he knew. But the world's changed. The old ways are dying whether you accept it or not. Lucien's grip on Seraphina's hand tightened. We were building something better, something that would have outlasted all of you. And when you pull those triggers, you're not preserving his legacy. You're destroying the only chance it had to evolve into something that matters. Pretty speech, Vescari said. Doesn't change the outcome. No, but it needed to be said. Lucien looked at Seraphina and she saw everything he'd never put into words written across his face. Regret, affection, something that might have been love if they'd had more time. I'm sorry I brought you into this. Don't be. Her voice was steady even though her hands were shaking. I chose to stay. That's on me. Ready, Elena commanded. Seraphina closed her eyes. Then the warehouse lights exploded in a shower of sparks and glass, plunging everything into absolute darkness. Chaos erupted, shouting, gunfire, the sound of bodies hitting the floor. Seraphina felt Lucien yank her down and sideways, pulling her behind what felt like a concrete pillar. Stay low, he hissed in her ear. Don't move. Don't breathe. Emergency lighting kicked in 30 seconds later, dim red bulbs that turned the warehouse into something from a nightmare. Through the crimson haze, Seraphina could see men scrambling, trying to reestablish positions. And then she saw them, pouring in through side doors and roof access points, dressed in tactical gear with night vision equipment, moving with military precision, not Lucien's people, someone else's. The newcomers engaged Elena's security teams with brutal efficiency. 3-round bursts, coordinated movements. Within 90 seconds, half of Elena's people were down. Viscari and his group scattered, diving for cover and returning fire. Victor's Russians formed a defensive perimeter. The warehouse became a war zone. "Who are they?" Seraphina gasped. "I have no idea." Lucien was scanning the chaos, trying to find a pattern. "But they're not here to save us. They're here for something else." A figure in black tactical gear appeared in front of their pillar. Seraphina raised her weapon, but Lucien grabbed her wrist. "Don't," he said quietly. The figure pulled off their helmet. It was a woman in her early 60s with iron gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes like chips of flint. She looked at Lucien with an expression Seraphina couldn't read. "Hello, Lucien," the woman said. Her accent was British, educated. "Your mother sends her regards." Lucien's face went white. "My mother's dead. She died when I was 6. Is that what Alessandro told you?" The woman's smile was bitter. "No, dear boy, I'm very much alive, just not where your father could reach me." She extended a gloved hand. "Margaret D'Aquila, though I've been using my maiden name, Blackwood, for the past 28 years. Seraphina watched Lucien stare at this woman like she was a ghost made flesh. "This isn't possible." "It's extremely possible. I faked my death and disappeared because your father was a monster who would have eventually killed me. I've spent 3 decades building my own organization in Europe while watching from a distance to see what kind of man his son would become." Margaret's eyes were sharp as surgical steel. "And when my sources told me Elena was orchestrating your assassination, I decided it was time to come home and settle some family business." The firefight around them intensified. Margaret's people were winning, pushing Elena's teams back toward the exits. "Why?" Lucien's voice was raw. "Why now? Why not reach out years ago?" "Because until now, you were still your father's son, building his empire, following his rules. I couldn't risk contact while you were still loyal to his vision." Margaret glanced at Seraphina. "But then you married someone who made you question everything. Someone who made you want something different. And that gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, you'd inherited something from me after all. You don't know anything about me. I know you were planning to transform the organization into legitimate infrastructure. I know you wanted alliances instead of wars. I know you were trying to do exactly what I spent years begging your father to do." Margaret's voice softened fractionally. "I know you're my son, Lucien, and despite everything, I'm not willing to let you die in this warehouse." Elena's voice cut through the chaos. "Margaret, this doesn't concern you." The older women stared at each other across the warehouse floor while bullets flew and men died between them. "You work for me, Elena," Margaret said coldly. "Have for the past 15 years. I'm the one who placed you in Alessandro's household. I'm the one who's been funding your operations." Elena's composure cracked for the first time. "That's not possible. You're dead. I attended your funeral." "You attended the funeral of a woman who looked enough like me after the car accident that Alessandro believed it, but I've been very much alive and very much paying attention." Margaret's weapon came up, pointed directly at Elena's chest. "You were supposed to protect my son. That was the deal. Keep him safe until I could make contact. Instead, you tried to have him killed. I was protecting Alessandro's legacy. Alessandro's legacy is ashes and blood. I'm here to give Lucien a different one." Margaret's finger tightened on the trigger. "Any last words?" Elena's face was a mask of fury and something that might have been grief. "You should have stayed dead." "Probably." The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Elena dropped like a puppet with cut strings, blood spreading across the concrete floor. Her eyes were open and empty, staring at nothing. Seraphina felt Lucien flinch beside her. Whatever else Elena had been, traitor, manipulator, murderer, she'd also raised him. That bond didn't disappear just because she'd tried to kill them. Margaret lowered her weapon and gestured to her team. "Secure the perimeter. Anyone who's not us or them," she indicated Lucien and Seraphina, "goes down." The next 5 minutes were brutal efficiency. Margaret's people moved through the warehouse systematically, disarming Elena's remaining security and securing all exits. Viscari and his people retreated in disorder, apparently deciding this fight wasn't worth their lives. When the shooting finally stopped, only Margaret's team and the bodies remained. She crossed to where Lucien and Seraphina still crouched behind the pillar. "Get up. We need to move before the authorities arrive. My people can clean this scene, but we can't explain it." Lucien stood slowly, pulling Seraphina up with him. His face was unreadable. Why should I trust you? Because I just saved your life, and because you don't have any better options. Margaret started walking toward the exit. Come or stay, but decide quickly. Seraphina looked at Lucien. His expression was completely blank, shocked probably, from finding out his dead mother was alive and had just killed the woman who raised him. Lucien, she said softly, we need to go. He nodded mechanically and followed Margaret. Seraphina stayed close to his side, acutely aware that they were surrounded by armed strangers whose loyalty they couldn't count on. Outside, 3 black Range Rovers were waiting. Margaret climbed into the lead vehicle and gestured for them to follow. The interior was all black leather and tinted windows. A small laptop was mounted on a swing-arm desk. Margaret opened it and pulled up files as the convoy started moving. Where are we going? Seraphina asked. Somewhere safe where we can talk. You both have questions. I have answers. But first, Margaret looked at Lucien. I need you to understand something. I didn't abandon you by choice. Your father found out I was planning to leave and take you with me. He made it very clear that if I tried, he'd hunt us both down and make it look like an accident. The only way to keep you alive was to disappear and let him think I was dead. You left me with him. Lucien's voice was flat. Left me to grow up in that house, learning his violence, becoming exactly what he wanted. Yes, and I've regretted it every day for 28 years, but I also watched from a distance, made sure you had resources, made sure Elena, she paused, made sure you had someone who would protect you when I couldn't be there myself. She tried to kill me. She tried to preserve what Alessandro built. She was loyal to him, not to me. I miscalculated badly when I thought she'd prioritize your safety over his legacy. Margaret's jaw tightened. That's on me. They drove in silence for 10 minutes, heading out of the warehouse district and into the residential areas north of the city. Finally, the convoy pulled into an underground parking garage beneath a high-rise that looked expensive even by this neighborhood's standards. Margaret led them to an elevator that required both a keycard and a fingerprint scan. They rode to the top floor in silence. The penthouse that opened before them made Lucien's safe houses look modest. Floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the entire city. Art that belonged in museums. Furniture that whispered old money and older power. This is my operations center when I'm in the country, Margaret said, pouring herself a drink from a crystal decanter. I own the building. Every resident is either one of my people or thoroughly vetted. You're safe here. For how long? Seraphina asked. As long as necessary. Margaret turned to face them. What happened tonight changes everything. Elena's dead. Half the city's criminal leadership just watched my organization destroy their carefully planned execution. By morning, everyone will know that Margaret D'Aquila is alive and protecting her son. Which makes us even bigger targets, Lucien said. Initially, yes, but it also makes you untouchable in ways you weren't before. Margaret pulled up a map on a large screen mounted on the wall. I control significant operations in 11 European countries, legitimate businesses worth billions, political connections at the highest levels. Alessandro built his empire through fear and violence. I built mine through patient investment and strategic positioning, and now I'm offering to merge them. Lucien stared at the map. Why? Because I'm 63 years old and I don't have an heir. Because watching you try to transform your father's organization into something legitimate made me think you might actually be worthy of inheriting what I've built. Margaret's voice softened slightly. And because despite everything, you're still my son, and I'd like to know you before I die. The silence that followed was heavy with decades of missed connections and forced separation. Seraphina spoke first. What about the people who tried to kill us tonight? Biscari and the others? They'll regroup and try again, but now they're facing a united front, Lucien's North American operations and my European infrastructure. Margaret pulled up financial data. Together, we control enough of the supply chain that none of them can afford open war. They'll negotiate or they'll be frozen out completely. You're talking about exactly what I was trying to build, Lucien said slowly. Economic interdependence instead of territorial violence. Yes, except you were trying to do it alone, which made you vulnerable. With my backing, you become too powerful to challenge directly. Margaret looked between them. But it only works if you're willing to work with me, to trust me despite everything. Lucien walked to the windows and stared out at the city. his city, the empire his father built and his mother wanted to transform. Seraphina joined him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "What do you want to do?" she asked quietly. "I don't know." His voice was barely a whisper. "Everything I thought I knew about my life is a lie. Elena raised me, taught me everything, and she was planning my death for months. My mother's alive. My father's empire was built on foundations I never understood. And you—" He turned to look at her. "You were supposed to be a debt payment, a transaction, but you became the only real thing in this entire nightmare." Seraphina felt tears burning behind her eyes. "So what now? Now we decide who we want to be." Lucien looked back at Margaret. "If we do this, if we combine our operations, I have conditions. Name them. No more secrets. No more manipulations. You want to rebuild a relationship with me? It starts with honesty." "Agreed." "Second, Seraphina is my partner in this. Equal voice, equal authority. She doesn't get sidelined or protected. She's part of every decision." Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. "If that's what you want." "It is." Lucien took Seraphina's hand. "And third, we do this my way. We transform both operations into something legitimate. No more violence unless absolutely necessary. No more treating people like commodities. We build something that can exist in daylight instead of shadows." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, studying them both. "Your father would have had you killed for saying that." "I'm not my father." "No?" A ghost of a smile touched Margaret's lips. "You're not. You're better, or at least you're trying to be." She extended her hand. "Deal. We transform it together. All three of us." Lucien hesitated, then shook his mother's hand for the first time in 28 years. Seraphina felt something shift in the air. This was a beginning, not a resolution, but a starting point for something different. "I'll have my lawyers draft the merger documents," Margaret said. "In the meantime, you should both rest. It's been—" She paused, searching for words. "An eventful evening." That might have been the understatement of the decade. Margaret showed them to a guest suite that was larger than most apartments. King bed, private bathroom with a shower that looked like it belonged in a spa, windows that overlooked the sleeping city. When the door closed behind her, leaving them alone for the first time since the warehouse, Seraphina finally allowed herself to fall apart. She sank onto the bed and her hands started shaking, violent tremors that spread up her arms and into her chest. Her breath came in gasps. Lucien was beside her instantly, pulling her against him. "I've got you," he murmured. "You're safe. I've got you." "Elena?" Seraphina managed between breaths. "She planned everything. My father, the attacks, all of it." "I know. We almost died. We were seconds from—" "I know." His arms tightened around her. "But we didn't. We survived." The adrenaline crash hit her like a wave. Seraphina buried her face against Lucien's chest and let herself cry, huge gasping sobs that shook her entire body. For her father's manipulation. For the week of constant terror. For the woman she'd been before this nightmare started. That woman was gone. Burned away in warehouse fires and boardroom betrayals. What was left was someone harder. Someone who'd killed a man with a champagne bottle and walked into an ambush knowing she might die. Someone who'd chosen this life instead of running from it. Lucien held her through it all, one hand stroking her hair while the other pressed against her back. He didn't try to quiet her or tell her everything would be okay. He just held her while she broke apart and started reassembling the pieces into something that could survive. When the tears finally stopped, Seraphina pulled back enough to look at him. "Your mother just killed the woman who raised you." "Yes. And you're handling this way too calmly." Lucien's laugh was bitter. "I'm not handling it at all. I'm just postponing the breakdown until we're not in immediate danger anymore. Ask me tomorrow. I'll probably lose my mind." "Can I be there when you do?" "Where else would you be?" She kissed him. Not the ownership kiss from their wedding or the desperate survival kiss after the gala attack. This was something else, something softer and more terrifying because it meant something. He kissed her back like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. They stayed like that for a long time, holding on to each other in a stranger's penthouse while the city slowly came alive below them. Dawn was breaking, pink and gold light spilling across the buildings. They'd survived the night. Against impossible odds and perfect betrayals, they'd survived. What happens now? Seraphina asked. Lucien traced her jawline with his thumb, his expression unreadable. Now, we figure out if we can actually do this. Transform two violent empires into something legitimate. Work with a mother I thought was dead. Deal with enemies who want us gone. Build something worth keeping. Sounds impossible. It probably is. Good. Seraphina's smile was sharp. I'm tired of possible. Possible is boring. They fell asleep as the sun rose, tangled together on top of the covers, still wearing the tactical gear and weapons that had kept them alive. Neither of them bothered to undress or get under the blankets. Sleep was survival, and they'd worry about comfort later. When Seraphina woke, sunlight was streaming through the windows and Lucien was gone. She sat up fast, hand automatically reaching for the weapon at her hip. Then she heard voices from the main room. She found Lucien and Margaret sitting at a dining table that looked like it was made from a single piece of mahogany, laptops open in front of them, documents spread across the surface. You're awake, Margaret said. Coffee's fresh. Help yourself. Seraphina poured a cup and joined them. What's all this? The framework for merger, Lucien said. He looked like he'd slept maybe an hour. Turns out my mother's been preparing for this for years. She's got detailed plans for integrating both organizations. I'm very good at long-term strategy, Margaret said dryly. Seraphina scanned the documents. They were dense with legal language and corporate structures, but the basic outline was clear. Combine Lucien's North American operations with Margaret's European infrastructure, shift everything toward legitimate business ventures, and use the combined economic power to force the remaining criminal families into partnership agreements. This is ambitious. This is necessary. Margaret pulled up a news feed on her laptop. Look, the headline read, Warehouse Massacre Leaves 23 Dead. The article beneath it was light on details. Police were investigating, no suspects, possible gang violence. But Seraphina could read between the lines. Last night's battle was front-page news. By noon, every organization in the city will know what happened, Margaret said. They'll know Elena's dead. They'll know I'm alive. And they'll know that Lucien and Seraphina are under my protection, which means they have three choices. Negotiate for partnership, launch a suicidal war against combined forces, or get cut out of the infrastructure entirely. Most will negotiate, Lucien said. It's just smart business. And the ones who don't? Lucien's expression went cold. We make examples, not violent ones. We're done with that approach. But we freeze them out economically. No access to our shipping routes, our ports, our distribution networks. Within 6 months, they're either bankrupt or they come begging. It was ruthless strategy disguised as legitimate business. It was exactly what Lucien had been trying to build before Elena's betrayal. When do we start? Seraphina asked. Immediately. Margaret stood. I've already reached out to Angelo Messina and 2 other families. They're willing to meet this afternoon to discuss terms. Victor Constantine is being more difficult. He wants assurances about his European operations. And Vescari needs to be dealt with, Lucien interrupted. He orchestrated both attacks. He's not going to accept partnership quietly. Agreed, which is why I've arranged a separate meeting with him. Tomorrow. Neutral location. Just him, his top people, and us. Margaret's smile was predatory. We'll make him an offer he can't refuse. One way or another. They spent the rest of the day in meetings. Angelo Messina came first, the old man who'd questioned Seraphina at the wedding reception. He sat across from them in Margaret's conference room, looking older and more tired than before. I knew your mother when she was married to Alessandro, he said to Lucien. Smart woman. Too smart for your father. He never appreciated what he had. He appreciated ownership, Margaret said coldly, not partnership. True. Angelo sipped the espresso that had been placed in front of him. So, you're proposing what exactly? We all hold hands and sing songs of cooperation? We're proposing economic integration, Lucien said. Your port operations get priority access to our European shipping routes. In return, we get preferential treatment on East Coast distribution, shared profits, shared risks, shared success. And if I refuse? Then you lose access to 40% of your current revenue stream within 3 months. Within 6 months, you'll be operating at a loss. Lucien slid documents across the table. These are the routes and contracts that currently depend on infrastructure my mother and I control, jointly. You can partner with us or compete against us, but you can't ignore us." Angelo studied the documents for a long time. Then he looked up at Margaret. Alessandro would be furious if he could see this. Alessandro is dead and his way of doing business died with him. Margaret's voice was steel. "This is the future, Angelo. Adapt or become irrelevant." The old man sighed. "When you put it that way, where do I sign?" They had similar conversations with 3 other families. Not all of them went smoothly. One refused outright and stormed out, promising war. But most saw the writing on the wall. The old world was dying. The new one was being born, whether they liked it or not. By evening, Seraphina's head was pounding from hours of legal terminology and strategic negotiation. She excused herself and found a quiet corner of the penthouse with a view of the sunset. Lucien found her there 20 minutes later. "Overwhelming?" he asked. Understatement. She leaned against him when he came to stand beside her. "This morning we were almost dead. Tonight we're negotiating partnerships worth billions. I can't process the whiplash. Welcome to my entire life." He was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why are you still here? Your father's debt is settled. Elena's gone. You could walk away from all of this, from me, and no one would blame you. Margaret would set you up with a new identity, a new life, enough money to never worry again." He turned to look at her. "So why stay?" Seraphina thought about that. About the woman in the blood-red dress who'd walked down that aisle, expecting to survive 30 days at best. About the choices she'd made and the person she'd become. "Because leaving means spending the rest of my life wondering what we could have built together," she said finally. "And I'm done with regrets. Done with playing it safe. If I'm going to survive in this world, I want it to mean something." She met his eyes. "I want it to mean us." Lucien's expression cracked open, showing everything he usually kept hidden. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway." He kissed her like she was the only solid thing in a world made of quicksand and lies. They were still standing there when Margaret appeared in the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt, but we have a problem." They turned. Margaret's face was grim. "Vescari just sent a message. He's not interested in negotiating. He wants war, and he's not alone. He's convinced 5 other families to join him. They're calling themselves the Coalition for Traditional Operations." "How many people?" Lucien asked. "Combined? Approximately 200 armed personnel. Maybe more." Margaret pulled up intelligence reports on her phone. "They're positioning themselves as defenders of the old ways, claiming we're trying to destroy everything the previous generation built." "They're not wrong," Seraphina pointed out. "No, but they're also not going to win." Lucien's voice was cold. "We have more resources, better infrastructure, and legitimate political connections they can't touch. If they want war, we'll give them one, just not the kind they're expecting." "What are you thinking?" Margaret asked. "Economic warfare. We freeze them out of every system that matters. Banking, shipping, distribution networks. Within 2 weeks, they'll be operating in cash only with no way to move product or collect revenue. Within a month, their own people will start defecting because we can offer better terms. That's ruthless. That's business." Lucien looked at both of them. "We tried offering partnership. They chose violence. Now we show them what real power looks like." Over the next 72 hours, they executed Lucien's plan with surgical precision. Margaret's political connections shut down banking access for key coalition members. Lucien's people redirected shipping contracts and severed distribution agreements. Within 48 hours, Vescari's organization was hemorrhaging money. But Vescari wasn't going quietly. On the 3rd night, Seraphina woke to alarms screaming throughout the penthouse. Lucien was already up, weapon in hand. "Stay behind me." They found Margaret in the security center watching multiple screens showing the building's perimeter. 6 vehicles, approximately 20 men. They're breaching the parking garage. Her voice was clinical. "Security teams are engaging now." Gunfire echoed from somewhere far below. "How did they find us?" Seraphina demanded. "They didn't. This isn't about us." Margaret's expression was troubled. "They're after the data servers in the sub-basement. If they destroy them, they wipe out 3 years of financial records and contract documentation. Can we stop them?" "Security can slow them down, but 20 men with proper equipment..." Margaret was already moving toward the emergency exit. We need to evacuate. Now. They ran, down service stairs while explosions echoed through the building's infrastructure. Margaret's security teams were buying them time, but Seraphina could hear the fighting getting closer. They emerged into an underground tunnel system that connected multiple buildings. Margaret led them through the maze with practiced efficiency. Where does this go? Lucien asked. Safe house, 3 blocks west. If we can reach it. An explosion tore through the tunnel behind them, collapsing the ceiling in a shower of concrete and dust. They were cut off from the exit. Forward, Margaret ordered. There's a secondary road through the maintenance level. They found the maintenance access and descended into a network of pipes and electrical conduits that ran beneath the city's streets. Water dripped from overhead. The air smelled like mildew and decay. Seraphina's lungs burned from running. Her tactical vest felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. They were halfway through when Lucien stopped suddenly. Do you hear that? Seraphina listened. Voices, coming from ahead of them. They were trapped between Viscari's people behind and unknown threats ahead. We need to go up, Lucien said, pointing to a ladder that led to a service hatch. Street level. Take our chances above ground. They climbed. The hatch opened into an alley between 2 warehouses in the industrial district. Rain was pouring down, turning the pavement into a river. And waiting for them, illuminated by streetlights, were Damien Viscari and 10 of his best men. Hello, Lucien, Viscari said, raising his weapon. End of the line. They had nowhere left to run. The rain came down in sheets so thick Seraphina could barely see Viscari's face 10 feet away. Water ran into her eyes, mixed with sweat and the metallic taste of fear. Her hand found the Glock at her hip, but Lucien's fingers closed over hers, stopping her from drawing. Not yet, he breathed against her ear, barely audible over the downpour. Viscari's weapon, some kind of automatic rifle that looked military grade, stayed pointed at Lucien's chest. His men fanned out in a semicircle, cutting off every angle of escape. 10 guns. 3 targets. The math was simple and brutal. I have to admit, Viscari called out over the rain, I'm impressed you made it this far. Most people would have died in that warehouse, but you keep surviving, like cockroaches. He tilted his head. That ends tonight. Margaret stepped forward, placing herself between Viscari and Lucien. Her clothes were soaked through, her gray hair plastered to her skull, but her voice was steady as bedrock. You make a move on my son, Damien, and you'll have every European syndicate hunting you before sunrise. I've already sent proof of your involvement to Moscow, Berlin, and London. They're just waiting for my signal. Viscari laughed. Threats? From a woman who's been dead for 30 years? You think anyone cares about your European connections? This is American territory. Your influence died the moment you faked that car accident. My influence bought you the weapons you're holding, Margaret said coldly. Every rifle, every handgun, all purchased through shell companies I control. With serial numbers, I can trace back to you in under an hour. She smiled without warmth. Pull that trigger and you'll be explaining to federal prosecutors why you're in possession of illegally imported firearms tied to 17 unsolved murders. Your lawyers can't save you from that. The rain seemed to get heavier. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating Viscari's face in harsh white light. Seraphina saw uncertainty flicker across his expression. He hadn't known about the weapons. You're bluffing, he said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Am I? Check the serial number on that rifle. Go ahead. I'll wait. Viscari didn't move. His men shifted nervously, water running off their tactical gear in rivers. Lucien's hand tightened on Seraphina's, a silent message. Be ready. Even if what you're saying is true, Viscari said slowly, it doesn't change anything. You've destroyed the infrastructure that kept this city running for decades. You've turned legitimate territorial agreements into corporate mergers. You've made us all weak. We've made you all rich, Lucien countered. Your revenue is up 30% since we started implementing partnership agreements. Your territories are stable. Your people aren't dying in turf wars every other week. But you can't see past the violence because that's all you understand. Violence is the only language that matters in this business. No, money is the only language that matters. Violence is just what amateurs use when they run out of real power. Lucien took a step forward, pulling Seraphina with him. Margaret stayed close. You want to kill us? Fine. Pull the trigger. But then what? You think the other families will applaud you for murdering Margaret D'Aquila and her son? You think Victor and Angelo will shake your hand and go back to the old ways? They'll have no choice. They'll have every choice, because we've already signed the agreements, already moved the assets, already restructured the entire Eastern Seaboard's criminal infrastructure into something that can't be undone by 3 bodies in an alley. Lucien's voice was relentless. Kill us, and you accomplish nothing except putting yourself at war with people who control your weapons, your shipping routes, and your banking access. You'll be dead within a month. Viscari's finger was still on the trigger, but he wasn't shooting. He was thinking. Seraphina could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Risk versus reward. Pride versus survival. There's another option, Margaret said quietly. You join us, not as a subordinate, as a partner. We give you primary control over southern port operations, 40% share in the European distribution network, and a seat at the table when decisions get made. You want me to work with the people who've spent the last week destroying my business? We want you to stop wasting resources fighting a war you can't win and start making money instead. Margaret pulled out her phone, somehow still functional despite the rain. She showed him a spreadsheet. These are projected earnings for your organization over the next 5 years under current conditions. Now look at this. Projected earnings under partnership with our combined infrastructure. Even from where Seraphina stood, she could see the numbers were dramatically different. Viscari stared at the screen. His men were watching him now, waiting for a signal. Why would you offer this? He asked. After everything. Because you're dangerous and competent, and I'd rather have you inside our organization than spending the next decade trying to destroy it. Margaret pocketed her phone. And because despite being a ruthless bastard, you're also smart enough to know when you're beat. The question is whether your pride will let you admit it. The alley went silent except for the sound of rain hammering against pavement and metal. Seraphina held her breath. Her hand was still on her weapon, ready to draw if this went sideways. Lucien stood absolutely still, water running down his face, waiting. Viscari lowered his rifle. I want 50% of European distribution, he said, and veto power on any agreements that affect East Coast operations. 45% in consultation rights, not veto, Margaret countered. You don't get to block progress, but you get a voice in how it happens. 47, and I want it in writing. Today. Done. Margaret extended her hand. Viscari looked at it like it might be a trap. Then he shifted his rifle to his left hand and shook. The tension in the alley evaporated like steam. Viscari's men lowered their weapons. Someone actually laughed, a nervous, exhausted sound that acknowledged how close they'd all come to dying in the rain. My lawyers will have the contracts ready by morning, Margaret said. We'll meet at my office. No neutral ground. Just you, your counsel, and us. Fine, Viscari looked at Lucien. But if you try to screw me on this deal, partnership or not, I'll put you in the ground myself. Fair enough, Lucien said. Same goes. They stared at each other for another long moment, 2 predators acknowledging mutual respect. Then Viscari gestured to his men, and they disappeared into the rain. Seraphina finally allowed herself to breathe. Her legs were shaking so badly she had to lean against the alley wall. Jesus Christ, she managed. I thought we were dead. So did I, Lucien admitted. He looked at his mother. The weapons thing. Was that true? Every word. I've been tracking arms shipments into the city for 15 years. Viscari's been buying from my suppliers without knowing it. Margaret's smile was sharp. I told you, I'm very good at long-term strategy. They made their way to the backup safe house through streets that were flooding from the storm. By the time they arrived, Seraphina was soaked to the bone and exhausted down to her marrow. The safe house was smaller than Margaret's penthouse, but still more secure than most banks. 3-inch steel doors, biometric locks, enough surveillance equipment to monitor a small country. Margaret disappeared to make phone calls while Lucien and Seraphina found the bathroom and peeled off their wet tactical gear. We just turned our biggest enemy into a business partner, Seraphina said, watching water pool on the tile floor. How is that even possible? Because Viscari's a pragmatist underneath all the violence. He saw the numbers and realized pride wasn't worth dying for. Lucien stripped off his soaked shirt, revealing bruises across his ribs from getting slammed into that pillar in the warehouse. But don't trust him. He'll honor the agreement as long as it benefits him. The moment he sees an angle to betray us, he'll take it. So we just made a deal with someone who'll stab us in the back first chance he gets. Welcome to organized crime. Lucien's smile was tired. The only difference between this and legitimate business is how honest people are about the knives. They showered separately, Seraphina first, standing underwater hot enough to hurt until her skin turned red and her muscles stopped cramping. When she emerged wrapped in a towel, she found clean clothes laid out on the bed. Black jeans, dark sweater, combat boots again. She was pulling on the boots when she heard shouting from the main room. Lucien's voice, angry, and someone else, male, unfamiliar. Seraphina grabbed her weapon and moved toward the sound. She found Lucien standing face to face with a man in his early 40s, wearing an expensive suit that was somehow still immaculate despite the weather. Dark hair, sharp features, eyes like a shark's. Margaret stood between them, hands raised. "Both of you need to calm down," she was saying. "Calm down." Lucien's voice was volcanic. "He's been working against us this entire time." The stranger's expression was ice. "I've been protecting this organization from your suicidal transformation plans. There's a difference." "Who is this?" Seraphina demanded. Margaret turned. "Seraphina, meet Marcus Kincaid, my chief of European operations, and Lucien's half-brother." The room tilted. "What? Your father had an affair before we married," Margaret said quietly. "Marcus is the result. I've been raising him alongside my legitimate businesses for the past 38 years. Lucien looked like he'd been punched. "You have another son, and you never mentioned this?" "I was going to, after things stabilized. But then Vescari attacked, and we've been in survival mode." Margaret's voice was strained. "Marcus came as soon as he heard about the warehouse. He's been managing damage control in Europe while we dealt with the situation here." "Damage control?" Lucien's laugh was harsh. "Is that what we're calling sabotage now?" Marcus bristled. "I haven't sabotaged anything. I've been trying to convince Mother that rushing into partnership agreements with people like Vescari is insane. We should have consolidated power first, then negotiated from a position of absolute strength. We didn't have time for that approach. We were under active attack. Because you made yourself vulnerable by marrying some random woman whose father owed you money." Marcus's eyes cut to Seraphina with open contempt. "You brought an outsider into our world and expected it not to have consequences." Seraphina felt rage ignite in her chest. "This outsider threw a champagne bottle at an armed man to save your brother's life. What exactly have you contributed besides criticism?" "I've contributed 15 years of building European infrastructure while Lucien was busy playing king in America. I've contributed relationships with governments and corporations that actually matter. I've contributed—" "Jealousy," Lucien interrupted. "You've contributed jealousy because Mother contacted me instead of you. Because she's offering me partnership in her organization instead of making you the heir." Marcus's composure cracked. "You abandoned her. You grew up thinking she was dead while I was the one beside her, learning the business, building the empire. And now you walk in and get handed everything because you're the legitimate son?" "Boys," Margaret's voice cut through the argument like a blade. "Enough, both of you." They turned to look at her. "Marcus, Lucien is my son and your brother. You will treat him with respect, and you will extend that same courtesy to his wife." "But Mother, no buts. I raised you better than this." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "I know you feel overlooked. I know you've worked hard, but this isn't a competition. There's room for both of you in this organization, if you can learn to work together." "And if we can't?" Marcus asked coldly. "Then you'll force me to choose, and you won't like the outcome." The threat hung in the air like a guillotine. Marcus stared at his mother, then at Lucien, then at Seraphina. Something complicated moved behind his eyes, hurt and anger, and something that might have been fear. "Fine," he said finally. "I'll play nice, for now. But don't expect me to trust him just because we share DNA." "I wouldn't dream of it," Lucien replied. "Trust is earned, and so far you haven't earned anything except my suspicion." Likewise. They glared at each other like two wolves deciding whether to fight or establish pack hierarchy. Seraphina felt a headache building behind her eyes. As if this situation wasn't complicated enough, now there was a half-brother with a grudge and legitimate claims to Margaret's empire. Margaret pulled up a chair at the dining table and gestured for everyone to sit. We have work to do. Marcus, bring Lucien and Seraphina up to speed on European operations. Lucien, share our American agreements. We need to see where the infrastructures overlap and where we have gaps. They spent the next 6 hours in brutal detail, spreadsheets and contracts and organizational charts that mapped out criminal enterprises across 2 continents. Marcus was coldly professional, never addressing Lucien directly if he could avoid it. Lucien returned the favor. Seraphina found herself becoming the translator between them, pointing out synergies and conflicts that neither wanted to acknowledge to the other. The Munich shipping contracts overlap with our Philadelphia operations, she noted, comparing documents. If we coordinate timing, we could reduce costs by almost 20%. Marcus handles Munich, Lucien said flatly. I'm not comfortable giving him access to Philadelphia logistics. And I'm not comfortable sharing European contacts with someone who's only been in the business for a week, Marcus shot back, looking at Seraphina. Then I guess we're all uncomfortable, she said pleasantly. But the numbers don't lie. Either we coordinate or we're wasting resources. Your choice. The tension in the room could have been cut with a knife. By midnight, they had the skeleton of an integrated operation, a framework that would combine Margaret's European infrastructure with Lucien's American operations and create something unprecedented in scope and power. If they could actually make it work, if they didn't kill each other first, Margaret called it a night around 1 a.m., clearly exhausted. Marcus disappeared to a guest room without saying goodnight. That left Lucien and Seraphina alone in the dining room, surrounded by papers and laptops and the wreckage of their attempted family reconciliation. Your brother hates me, Seraphina said quietly. My brother hates everyone. Don't take it personally. Lucien rubbed his eyes. I didn't know about him. She never mentioned having another son. Can you blame her? She thought you were still loyal to your father's vision. Why would she introduce you to her real heir? Her real heir. The words tasted bitter in his mouth. That's what Marcus is, isn't it? The son she actually raised. The one who knows her business inside and out. I'm just the mistake she tried to save by faking her death. Seraphina moved around the table and took his face in both hands, forcing him to look at her. You are not a mistake. You're the man who tried to transform a violent empire into something legitimate, who protected me when he had every reason not to, who stood in that alley and talked Viscari down from execution to partnership. She pressed her forehead against his. Marcus might have been raised by her, but you're the one she came back for. Remember that. Lucien's arms came around her waist, pulling her close. How are you so sure about everything? I'm not sure about anything. I'm terrified constantly. I just hide it better than you do. His laugh was exhausted. We're quite a pair. Yeah, we really are. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in a stranger's safe house, while the world outside tried to figure out what to do with them. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Margaret's lawyers arrived with contracts. Viscari showed up with his own legal team and enough bodyguards to start a small war. Angelo Messina came representing 3 other families who'd agreed to the partnership framework. The conference room became a battlefield of negotiation and legal terminology that made Seraphina's head spin. Marcus sat at Margaret's right hand, offering commentary on European implications. Lucien sat at her left, pushing back on terms that gave away too much American control. Seraphina found herself mediating again, translating between legal jargon and practical reality. The port access clause is too broad, Marcus was saying. It gives Viscari's people unrestricted entry to Hamburg and Rotterdam. We can't afford that kind of exposure. Then restrict it to specific cargo types, Seraphina suggested. Commercial goods only. No passenger traffic. That limits his access while still giving him what he needs for distribution. Viscari's lawyer nodded. That's acceptable. Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but couldn't find fault with the logic. They went back and forth like that for hours, hammering out details that would govern billions in revenue and thousands of lives. By late afternoon, they had agreements that satisfied most parties, but not everyone. Victor Constantine's representative, a cold-eyed woman named Anya, refused to sign without significant concessions on Eastern European territories. Mr. Constantine controls from Prague to Moscow, she said, in heavily accented English. Your organization has no presence there. Why should he accept partnership when he already owns the infrastructure? Because we control what comes into those territories, Margaret replied. The ports, the shipping routes, the customs contacts. He can own the land, but we own the supply chain. Without us, his infrastructure is worthless. Then we will build our own supply chain. That will take years and cost billions. We're offering integration now, for a fair percentage. Fair according to whom? Anya's smile was sharp. You're asking Mr. Constantine to give up autonomy in exchange for access to systems he could simply take by force. The temperature in the room dropped. Is that a threat? Lucien asked quietly. It's a statement of fact. Mr. Constantine has resources you're only beginning to understand. Military contracts, government connections, access to intelligence services that could make your entire operation disappear overnight. Anya stood. He sends his regrets, but he will not be joining your alliance, and he suggests you reconsider expanding into territories he considers his own. She left. The room erupted in worried conversation. Victor Constantine was the most powerful of the Eastern European syndicate leaders, a former intelligence officer with connections that went straight to the Kremlin. If he was refusing partnership and threatening conflict, this could get very ugly very fast. We need to respond, Marcus said immediately. Show him we're not intimidated. We need to be smart, Lucien countered. Going to war with Victor is suicide. He has resources we can't match. So what? We just let him threaten us? We find out what he actually wants. That wasn't a declaration of war. It was an opening negotiation position. He's testing to see if we'll panic. Margaret nodded slowly. Lucien's right. Victor is many things, but impulsive isn't one of them. He's looking for leverage. We need to figure out what that leverage is. They spent the rest of the day trying to do exactly that. Pulling intelligence reports, analyzing Victor's recent movements, tracking financial flows. What they found was concerning. He's been buying up media companies, Seraphina said, staring at the pattern on the screen. Newspapers, television stations, online platforms, all in the past 6 months. Why would he care about media? Marcus asked. Because he's preparing for a public relations war, Lucia realized. He's going to try to destroy our reputation, make us look like criminals while positioning himself as a legitimate businessman. Then he uses that narrative to freeze us out of political connections. It was brilliant strategy. Victor couldn't beat them in economic warfare, so he was shifting the battlefield to public perception. Can he actually do that? Seraphina asked. If he controls enough media outlets, absolutely. Margaret looked troubled. We've spent years building relationships with politicians and corporate leaders. If Victor can poison those relationships by making us look like thugs, we lose our legitimacy, Lucien finished. And without that, the entire transformation fails. We're just criminals again. So how do we stop him? No one had an immediate answer. They worked through the night, wargaming scenarios and looking for angles. But Victor had positioned himself perfectly. Far enough away that direct confrontation was impractical, powerful enough that economic pressure wouldn't work quickly enough. By dawn, they were exhausted and no closer to a solution. That's when the news broke. Every major network ran the same story simultaneously, a coordinated release that reeked of Victor's media manipulation. The headline read, "Organized crime figures attempt legitimate business takeover." The article laid out everything. Margaret's European operations, Lucien's American infrastructure, the warehouse massacre, even details about partnership agreements that were supposed to be confidential. Someone had leaked everything to the press, and the story painted them as violent criminals trying to infiltrate legitimate business sectors. "He's burning us," Marcus said, staring at the television in horror, "making us so toxic that no legitimate business or politician will touch us." Lucien's phone started ringing, then Margaret's. Then every phone in the room, partners calling to back out of agreements, politicians distancing themselves, banks freezing accounts pending investigation. In one coordinated media strike, Victor had destroyed 6 months of careful positioning. "We need to respond," Seraphina said. "Put out our own statement. Tell our side." "It won't matter," Margaret said quietly. "He owns the platforms. Anything we say will be buried or twisted. This is what character assassination looks like when it's done by professionals." "Then what do we do?" Lucien stood and walked to the windows. Outside, the city was waking up to the news that its criminal infrastructure was trying to go legitimate. The story would dominate the news cycle for days, maybe weeks. "We go to the source," he said finally. "We meet with Victor, face to face, and we make him a deal he can't refuse." "He'll never agree to that," Marcus protested. "He's winning. Why would he meet with us?" Because he's not winning, Lucien turned to face them. He's destroying our reputation, yes, but he's also exposing himself. Every media company he owns is now on record as being controlled by organized crime. Every politician he's connected to is now under scrutiny. He's burning our legitimacy, but he's also burning his own. Mutually assured destruction, Seraphina realized. Exactly. Which means he's vulnerable too. We just need to make him see it. Lucien looked at his mother. Can you get us a meeting? Margaret considered. Maybe. Victor and I have history, not pleasant history, but history nonetheless. I can reach out through back channels. But what's the play? What do we offer him? Everything. Full partnership, equal shares in the combined operation, a seat at the head table alongside you, me, and Marcus. Lucien's voice was steel. We make him so invested in our success that destroying us destroys him too. That's insane, Marcus said. You want to give our biggest enemy control over our entire organization? I want to turn our biggest enemy into our biggest ally. There's a difference. They argued about it for another hour, but eventually Margaret made the call. Whatever she said in rapid Russian, it worked. Victor agreed to a meeting. 48 hours. Moscow. Neutral territory with enough security that no one could make a move without triggering an international incident. This is a trap, Marcus said flatly. He's going to kill us the moment we land. Probably, Lucien agreed, but we're out of options. We either go to Moscow and try to salvage this, or we watch our entire organization collapse under media scrutiny and political pressure. Some choice. Welcome to leadership. It's all terrible choices and worse alternatives. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Margaret arranged transportation, a private jet that would take them directly to Moscow with enough security to make it clear they weren't coming defenseless. Lucien coordinated with their remaining American partners, making sure operations wouldn't collapse if they didn't come back. Marcus handled European damage control, trying to minimize defections. Seraphina found herself in the strange position of being the only person everyone would actually talk to. Marcus wouldn't speak to Lucien directly. Lucien barely acknowledged Marcus's existence. Margaret was trying to hold them together while managing a business empire under assault. The night before they were supposed to leave, Seraphina found Lucien in the safe house's small gym, beating the hell out of a heavy bag. His knuckles were bleeding. He didn't seem to notice. "You're going to break your hands," she said from the doorway. "Don't care." "Liar." He stopped punching and leaned against the bag, breathing hard. Sweat ran down his face and chest. "I'm walking into a meeting with a man who wants me dead, bringing my wife who's only alive because of me, accompanied by a mother who abandoned me and a brother who hates me." His voice was raw. "And if this goes wrong, we all die in Moscow, and Victor wins everything." Seraphina walked over and took his damaged hands in hers. "Then we make sure it doesn't go wrong." "How? We have no leverage, no angle, just a desperate hope that Victor will choose partnership over destroying us." "We have something he doesn't," she said quietly. "We have each other, you and me, Margaret, and even Marcus, as much as he doesn't want to admit it. Victor's alone. He controls through fear and money, but he has no one he actually trusts. That's our advantage. Trust doesn't stop bullets." "No, but it might stop him from firing them in the first place." Lucien searched her face. "You really believe that?" "I have to. Because the alternative is giving up. And I didn't survive the past 2 weeks just to quit now." He kissed her then, desperate and fierce and tasting like blood and sweat. She kissed him back with everything she had, pouring all her fear and hope and stubborn refusal to surrender into the contact. When they finally pulled apart, his eyes were clearer. "If we die in Moscow, we won't. But if we do, I need you to know something." He took a shaky breath. "I love you. I should have said it before, should have said it 100 times, but I'm saying it now. I love you, Seraphina, and whatever happens tomorrow, that's real." Tears burned behind her eyes. "I love you too. Which is why we're both coming home. Together. Promise?" Promise. It was a lie. They both knew it. But sometimes lies were all you had to keep the darkness at bay. The flight to Moscow took 14 hours. They sat in the private jet's cabin, Lucien and Seraphina in one section, Margaret and Marcus in another, with armed security stationed throughout. No one spoke much. Seraphina tried to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw Viscari's gun pointed at Lucien's chest. Saw Elena dropping dead in the warehouse. Saw a dozen ways the Moscow meeting could go catastrophically wrong. When they finally landed at Sheremetyevo Airport, it was early morning Moscow time and snowing. Fat white flakes that made the city look almost peaceful. Victor's people were waiting. 6 black SUVs with tinted windows and enough armed men to invade a small country. They were escorted into the vehicles without ceremony and driven through streets that should have been familiar from Margaret's intelligence briefings, but felt completely foreign. They ended up at a compound outside the city, a sprawling estate that looked like it belonged to czars before the revolution. High walls, armed guards, the kind of place where people disappeared and were never found. Victor Constantine himself stood at the entrance. He was shorter than Seraphina expected, maybe 5'8", but built like a boxer. Silver hair, cold eyes, the kind of face that had seen too much violence to be impressed by threats. "Margaret," he said in English with only a trace of accent. "It's been too long." "Victor." Margaret's voice was carefully neutral. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I was curious what you'd offer to stop the bleeding. Your media situation is quite dire." His eyes moved to Lucien. "And this must be the famous son, the one who wants to transform our industry into something respectable." "That's the goal," Lucien said evenly. "Admirable, naive, but admirable." Victor's gaze landed on Seraphina. "And the wife who started all this trouble. You have quite a talent for surviving." "I've had good teachers." Victor smiled without warmth. "Come inside. We have much to discuss." The estate's interior was exactly what Seraphina expected, opulent and cold at the same time. They were led to a conference room that looked like it hosted government meetings, with a table large enough to seat 30. Victor sat at the head. His people ranged along the sides. Margaret, Lucien, Seraphina, and Marcus took seats opposite them. "Let's dispense with pleasantries," Victor said. "You're here because I've destroyed your reputation, and you're desperate to salvage the situation. What exactly are you offering?" "Full partnership," Lucien said. "Equal shares, equal authority. You become part of the organizational structure we're building, with complete transparency on operations and profits." "Why would I want that when I can simply wait for your empire to collapse and absorb the pieces?" "Because absorbing the pieces means war with every other family who will want their share. Because we control infrastructure you don't. And because..." Lucien leaned forward. "The media attention you've generated is cutting both ways. Every newspaper and television station you own is now being investigated for ties to organized crime. You've made yourself as toxic as you made us." Victor's expression didn't change. "A calculated risk." "Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, you've exposed yourself for temporary advantage. The American FBI is already looking into your media holdings. Interpol has opened files. Politicians you've paid are distancing themselves." Lucien's voice was relentless. "You can destroy us, Victor, but you'll go down with us. Or you can join us and we transform this entire industry together. And I'm supposed to trust you? No. You're supposed to trust mathematics. The numbers work better together than apart. Everything else is just ego." Silence fell across the conference room. Victor studied them with those cold eyes, calculating odds and angles. Then he laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound, but it broke the tension. "You have balls, I'll give you that. Coming to Moscow. Making demands when you're in no position to demand anything." He stood and walked to the windows overlooking snow-covered grounds. "Your father would have had you killed for this level of audacity, Lucien." "My father was a dinosaur who died choking on his own blood," Lucien replied. "I'm not interested in following his example." "No. You're interested in something much more dangerous. Evolution." Victor turned back to face them. "The problem with evolution is that it requires extinction. Old species die, new ones emerge, and the transition period is always violent. Which is why we need to control the violence, channel it into something productive. Or we could just let it burn and see who survives." Seraphina couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Is that really what you want? More bodies, more investigations, more attention from authorities who'd love nothing better than to take down organized crime leaders? We're offering you a way out, a way forward. Why are you so determined to stay in the past?" Victor's eyes cut to her. Because the past is profitable and certain. The future you're proposing is neither. The future is never certain, but it's also the only direction we can move. You can fight it and die slow, or embrace it and maybe, just maybe, build something that outlasts all of us. For a long moment, Victor just stared at her. Then he looked at Lucien. Your wife is either very brave or very stupid. Both, Lucien said. That's what makes her dangerous. Victor actually smiled at that. A real smile. Not the shark grin from before. I'll make you a counteroffer, he said, returning to his seat. I join your partnership, but not as an equal, as the primary investor. I put capital into your infrastructure transformation. Enough capital to make the media scrutiny irrelevant because we'll have legitimate business revenue backing everything. In return, I get controlling interest, 51%. Absolutely not, Marcus said immediately. That gives you power to override any decision we make. Yes, it does. But it also makes me fully invested in your success. If this fails, I lose billions. That's better collateral than any legal contract. Victor's expression was calculating. Take it or leave it. Those are my terms. Margaret looked at Lucien. Lucien looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Seraphina. It was a terrible deal. It was also the only deal on the table. 49%, Lucien said. And a board structure that requires unanimous approval on major decisions. You get plurality control and guaranteed return on investment, but you can't unilaterally destroy what we're building. Victor considered. 49% with veto power on any agreement that affects Eastern European operations. Deal. They shook hands across the table while Seraphina's heart hammered in her chest. They'd just given Victor enormous power over their combined organization, but they'd also tied his success directly to theirs, mutually assured survival. The details took another 8 hours to hammer out. By the time they finished, it was dark outside, and Seraphina was so exhausted she could barely think straight. Victor ordered dinner brought in, traditional Russian food that was actually delicious, and the mood shifted from hostile negotiation to something almost cordial. To unlikely partnerships, Victor said, raising a glass of vodka. May they be profitable for everyone involved. They drank. The vodka burned going down but settled warmly in Seraphina's stomach. Now that business is concluded, Victor said, I'm curious about something. How did you really survive Elena's betrayal? The warehouse should have been your grave. My mother, Lucien said simply. She had people I didn't know about, resources I couldn't track. She's been playing a longer game than any of us realized. Victor looked at Margaret with something like respect. You always were the dangerous one in that marriage. Alessandro never appreciated that. Alessandro appreciated ownership, not intelligence. Which is why he died badly, and you're sitting here making deals. Victor refilled their glasses. To dangerous women. The world underestimates them at its peril. They drank again. Seraphina felt the vodka going to her head, making everything slightly fuzzy at the edges. She should probably stop drinking, but the relief of surviving this meeting was making her giddy. They'd done it. Against every odd, they'd turned their most dangerous enemy into an investor. The celebration lasted another hour before Victor's people showed them to guest quarters. Seraphina and Lucien were given a suite that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel, all dark wood and expensive linens. As soon as the door closed, Lucien pulled her against him and kissed her hard. We survived, he breathed against her mouth. We did. We partnered with Victor Constantine. We did. We might actually pull this off. We might. They fell onto the bed together, exhausted and relieved and still running on adrenaline. Seraphina felt tears sliding down her face and couldn't tell if they were from stress or joy or just pure exhaustion. Hey, Lucien wiped them away gently. What's wrong? Nothing. Everything. I don't know. She laughed shakily. 2 weeks ago, I was a normal person. Now I'm making billion-dollar deals with Russian crime lords in Moscow, and somehow this is my life. You can still walk away. I meant what I said before. I'll set you up with a new identity, new life, enough money to... She kissed him to shut him up. I'm not walking away. I'm just processing. Process faster. We have a flight home in 6 hours. Home. The word felt strange. Where even is home anymore? Wherever we are, together. It should have sounded sappy. Instead, it sounded like the only truth in a world built on lies. They made love slowly, carefully, taking comfort in the familiar feel of each other's bodies. Outside, snow continued to fall over Moscow. Inside, they created their own warmth against the cold. When Seraphina finally fell asleep, she dreamed of blood-red wedding dresses and champagne bottles, and a man with black eyes who'd bought her to settle a debt, and chosen to love her instead. She woke to Lucien shaking her shoulder. "Get up, we have a problem." Seraphina bolted upright, instantly awake. "What kind of problem?" "The kind with guns." They dressed quickly and followed voices to Victor's security center. Margaret and Marcus were already there, along with Victor and his head of security, a scarred man named Dmitri who looked like he ate bullets for breakfast. "What happened?" Lucien demanded. Victor pointed to surveillance screens showing the estate's perimeter. "We have company, approximately 40 men, military-grade weapons. They breached the outer wall 6 minutes ago." "Who?" "Unknown, but they're moving with professional precision. This isn't a random attack." Seraphina stared at the screens, watching armed figures advance through the snow-covered grounds. They moved in coordinated teams, covering each other, advancing on the main building with clear intent. "Viscari?" she asked. "Wouldn't dare. Not here. Not after signing agreements." Victor's expression was grim. "Someone else. Someone who doesn't want our partnership to succeed." Marcus leaned closer to the screens. "Look at their formations. That's former military, maybe current military." A horrible suspicion formed in Seraphina's mind. "Victor, who knew about this meeting?" "Only my inner circle, and yours." "And who benefits if we all die here? In Moscow? Together." Understanding dawned across Victor's face. "Every family we've frozen out of the partnership. Every territory we've absorbed. Every old guard organization that wants things to go back to how they were." "It's not one group," Lucien realized. "It's all of them. They've pooled resources for one coordinated strike." "To kill every leader trying to transform the industry," Margaret finished, "all at once." The screens showed the assault teams reaching the main building. Explosions bloomed in the pre-dawn darkness as they breached the doors. Victor's security opened fire. The battle had begun, and they were trapped in the middle of it with nowhere to run. The first explosion shook the building so violently that Seraphina had to grab the edge of the security console to stay upright. Dust rained from the ceiling. Alarms screamed. On the surveillance screens, Victor's outer security perimeter was being systematically destroyed by men who moved like they'd done this before. "How many people do you have inside the compound?" Lucien demanded. Victor's jaw was tight. 32, maybe less now. They weren't prepared for a full military assault." "Neither were we." Margaret was already moving toward the weapons locker. "We need to fortify this position and hold until reinforcements arrive." "Reinforcements from where?" Marcus's voice was sharp with fear. "We're in the middle of nowhere. By the time anyone gets here, we'll be corpses." Another explosion, closer this time. The lights flickered. Dmitri spoke rapid Russian into his radio, then turned to Victor. "They've breached the east wing. 6 men down. The rest are falling back to secondary positions. Tell them to fall back here. Consolidate defense around the security center." Victor pulled open the weapons locker and started distributing rifles. "We make our stand in this building. It's reinforced. Limited entry points. We can hold it." "For how long?" Seraphina asked, taking the weapon he handed her. Her hands were steadier than she expected. "Long enough." It wasn't a real answer, but it was the only one they had. Lucien checked his rifle with practiced efficiency, muscle memory from years of violence. "Seraphina, you stay in the security center. Monitor the cameras. Give us positions." "No." She chambered around. "You taught me to shoot. You taught me to fight. I'm not hiding while you die protecting me. This isn't the warehouse. This is actual warfare. These people are professionals." "So am I. Now." She met his eyes. "Together, remember? That was the promise." Lucien looked like he wanted to argue. Then he just nodded once, accepting it. Margaret positioned herself near the main entrance to the security center, her rifle held with the kind of competence that came from years of practice. Marcus took the opposite side, his face pale but determined. They were as ready as they were going to be. The attackers reached the main corridor 3 minutes later. Seraphina watched them on the screens, moving in two-man teams, clearing rooms with brutal efficiency. Victor's people tried to slow them down, but were systematically eliminated. The attackers weren't taking prisoners. "They're coming up the west stairwell," she called out. 4 men, no, 6. Another team behind them. "Dmitri, take your people and block that stairwell," Victor ordered. "Make them work for every inch." The big Russian nodded and disappeared with 5 men. 30 seconds later, gunfire erupted from the direction he'd gone. Sustained bursts, screaming, the wet sound of bodies hitting marble. On the screens, Seraphina watched Dmitri's team engage the attackers. They held for maybe 90 seconds before being overrun. Dmitri himself went down fighting, taking 3 enemies with him before a burst of automatic fire cut him apart. "West stairwell is lost," she reported, her voice somehow steady despite what she'd just witnessed. "They're 60 seconds from this corridor." Lucien moved to the doorway, using the frame as cover. Margaret flanked the opposite side. Marcus stayed back with Seraphina and Victor, covering the rear approach. The first attacker came around the corner, firing. Lucien put 2 rounds through his chest before he could get a third shot off. The body dropped. Then the hallway exploded with gunfire. Seraphina couldn't track individual shots. It was just noise and muzzle flashes and bullets chewing through the walls. She fired when she saw movement, didn't think about whether she hit anything, just kept pulling the trigger until the magazine was empty. Reload, fire, reload again. Her ears were ringing so loud she couldn't hear her own breathing. Margaret dropped an attacker. Marcus got another. Lucien was firing in controlled bursts, making every shot count. But there were too many of them. For every one they killed, 2 more appeared. They were being pushed back into the security center by sheer volume of fire. "We can't hold this," Marcus shouted over the chaos. "We don't have a choice." Victor returned fire, his face splattered with blood that probably wasn't his. "If we abandon this position, we're dead in 60 seconds. A grenade bounced into the corridor. "Down!" Lucien screamed. Seraphina hit the floor as the explosion turned the hallway into a storm of fire and shrapnel. The concussion felt like being hit by a truck. Her vision whited out. Sound disappeared into a high-pitched whine. When she could see again, the doorway was on fire and Margaret was lying on the ground, not moving. "Mom!" Marcus scrambled toward her. Margaret groaned and pushed herself up on one elbow. Blood ran from a cut on her forehead, but she was alive. "I'm fine, keep fighting!" But they weren't fine. The explosion had bought the attackers time to advance. They were right outside the security center now, preparing for the final push. This was it. The end of the line. Seraphina found Lucien's hand in the smoke and cordite haze. He squeezed once, tight enough to hurt. "I love you," he said. Had to shout it to be heard over the ringing in her ears. "I love you too." The attackers charged. What happened next was chaos distilled to its purest form. Bodies in the doorway. Muzzle flashes painting everything in strobe light clarity. The smell of blood and gunpowder and burning plastic. Seraphina fired until her rifle clicked empty, then drew her handgun and kept firing. Someone tackled her from the side. She went down hard, the attacker's weight crushing her against the concrete floor. His hands found her throat. She couldn't breathe, couldn't see past the spots dancing across her vision. Then Lucien was there, dragging the man off her and putting 3 rounds through his skull at point-blank range. Brain matter sprayed across the floor. Seraphina gasped for air, throat burning. "Get up!" Lucien hauled her to her feet. "Stay with me!" They fought back to back. Seraphina lost track of how many men came through that door, lost track of how many she shot. Everything became mechanical. See target, fire, see next target, fire again. Until suddenly, there weren't any more targets. The hallway outside had gone quiet. Seraphina stood there, breathing hard, weapon raised, waiting for the next wave. It didn't come. "What?" Her voice was ragged. "What happened?" Victor moved to the doorway, rifle up, checking the corridor. Bodies littered the floor. At least 15. Maybe 20. Hard to tell where one ended and another began. "They're pulling back," he said slowly. Why would they pull back? The answer came from a speaker mounted on the wall. Someone had patched into the building's intercom system. "Victor Constantine, Lucien D'Aquila, Margaret D'Aquila. This is James Harrington, the lawyer, Elena's co-conspirator. still alive despite everything. We have the building surrounded, Harrington's voice continued, calm and professional, as if he was conducting a deposition. You've killed approximately 20 of our people. We've killed most of yours. This can end one of two ways. You surrender and we negotiate terms. Or we bring in the incendiaries and burn you out. You have 5 minutes to decide. Silence fell over the security center. He's bluffing, Marcus said, but his voice was uncertain. They can't afford to burn this place. Too much evidence, too many witnesses. Can't they? Margaret was checking her remaining ammunition. We're all dead anyway if we surrender. At least if we fight, we die on our feet. Or we find a third option, Lucien said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. What third option? Victor demanded. We're trapped in a burning building with maybe 50 rounds of ammunition left between all of us. What miracle are you planning? Not a miracle, a negotiation. Lucien walked to the intercom and hit the transmit button. Harrington, this is Lucien D'Aquila. I want to talk. Static crackled. Then, you have 4 minutes. You want us dead, I understand that. We're threatening the old power structures, forcing change that a lot of people don't want. But killing us doesn't stop what we've started. The agreements are signed. The infrastructure is merged. Even if we die tonight, the transformation continues. Not if there's no one left to implement it. You think Victor and I are the only ones who matter? Margaret has operations across 11 countries. I have lieutenants who know every detail of the American systems. Kill us, and you create power vacuums that will tear this industry apart. Wars that will draw attention from every law enforcement agency on 3 continents. That's a risk we're willing to take. Are you? Because I'm looking at the body count here, Harrington. 20 of your people dead. How many families represented in that pile of corpses? How many sons and brothers and fathers are you going to explain to the other families? Lucien's voice was relentless. You came here to eliminate leadership. Instead, you've created martyrs. And started a war you can't win. Another pause. Longer this time. What are you proposing? A truce. We walk away from this building. You walk away. And tomorrow we meet at a neutral location to negotiate a real solution. One where everyone gets a seat at the table. You expect me to believe you'll actually show up for that meeting? I expect you to recognize that you're in the same trap we are. You can kill us tonight, sure. But then you'll spend the next decade fighting wars with people who blame you for our deaths. Or you can let us live and we figure out a way forward that doesn't end in everyone's destruction. Seraphina watched Lucien work, saw the wheels turning behind Harrington's silence. The lawyer was calculating odds, weighing outcomes. 1 hour, Harrington finally said. You have 1 hour to evacuate. After that, anyone still inside dies. And tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., neutral location of my choosing. If you don't show, we hunt you down wherever you run. The intercom went dead. Did that actually work? Marcus asked, stunned. Temporarily. Lucien set down the handset. He's buying time to regroup, so are we. But we need to move. Now. They gathered the wounded, 3 of Victor's people who'd survived, all with injuries that would need immediate medical attention. Margaret could walk, but was limping badly from shrapnel in her leg. Marcus had taken a round through his shoulder that had somehow missed everything vital. Seraphina was bruised and battered, but mostly intact. Lucien had a gash across his ribs that was bleeding freely, but didn't seem to slow him down. They looked like refugees from a war zone, which was exactly what they were. Victor led them through a service tunnel that ran beneath the estate to an auxiliary garage a quarter mile from the main building. 4 vehicles were waiting, already fueled and ready. Always have an exit strategy, Victor said grimly. Dmitri taught me that. They piled into the SUVs and drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward Moscow proper. Behind them, the estate was fully engulfed in flames. Harrington had apparently decided to burn it anyway. Evidence be damned. They didn't speak during the drive. There was nothing to say. They'd survived by the thinnest possible margin, and everyone knew it. Victor's Moscow safe house turned out to be an apartment in one of the city's older buildings, the kind of place that looked decrepit from the outside, but was fortress solid inside. A doctor was waiting, no questions asked, cash only, who went to work patching them up. Seraphina sat on a couch in the main room while the doctor examined her throat. Bruises were already forming where the attacker had tried to strangle her. Her voice came out raspy. "Can you swallow?" the doctor asked in accented English. Yes. Then you'll be fine. Keep ice on it. Rest your voice. He moved on to the next patient. Lucien appeared with 2 glasses of something amber. Whiskey, probably. Seraphina took it and drained half in one swallow. Your mother's going to be okay, he said, sitting beside her. Shrapnel wounds, but nothing permanent. Marcus took a bullet, but it was clean through. Victor's people are more seriously hurt, but they'll survive. And us? Alive. Against every reasonable expectation. He touched her throat gently, fury and fear warring in his expression. When I saw him on you, I know, but I'm okay. She took his hand. We're okay. For now. Tomorrow we meet Harrington and figure out if we can actually end this, or if we just bought ourselves a few more hours. Margaret limped over to join them, her leg bandaged and a cane supporting her weight. She looked older than she had that morning, exhausted in a way that went bone deep. We need to talk, she said. All of us. Before tomorrow. They gathered in the apartment's small dining room. Lucien, Seraphina, Margaret, Marcus, and Victor. The doctor had left. The wounded were sleeping. It was just the leadership now, trying to figure out what came next. Harrington wants a meeting, Margaret started, but what he really wants is leverage. Some way to maintain the old power structures while making it look like he's compromising. So we give it to him, Victor said. Limited autonomy in specific territories, local control with regional oversight. They get to keep their kingdoms. We get to implement transformation gradually. That could work, Marcus agreed reluctantly. If we frame it as a federation instead of a takeover. Separate organizations with shared infrastructure and economic agreements. It's a compromise, Lucien said slowly. But maybe that's what this needs to be. We've been trying to force change too fast. Maybe we need to let it happen organically. Your father would be disgusted by that level of patience, Margaret observed. My father died choking on his own blood because he couldn't adapt. I'd rather compromise than follow his example. They spent the next 3 hours hammering out a framework, a proposal that would give the old guard families significant autonomy while still moving the overall industry toward legitimacy. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what Lucien had originally envisioned, but it might actually work. When they finally broke, the sun was coming up over Moscow. Seraphina walked to the window and watched the city wake up. People heading to work, completely unaware that a war had been fought in the darkness. Lucien joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. Still think we can pull this off? He murmured against her hair. I think we don't have a choice. We either find a way to make this work, or we spend the rest of our lives running from people who want us dead. That's not much of a choice. No, but it's the one we have. The meeting with Harrington was set for a neutral location, a conference room in one of Moscow's high-end hotels, with enough security from all sides that no one could make a move without triggering a massacre. Switzerland had nothing on the armed neutrality in that room. Harrington arrived with representatives from 8 families, the coalition he'd assembled to try to kill them. They looked tired and angry and deeply suspicious. Lucien presented their proposal calmly, laying out the framework for a federated structure that preserved territorial control while implementing shared economic systems. The argument started immediately. This is just another way of controlling us, one representative said. An older man with scars across his knuckles and eyes like chips of granite. This is a way of surviving the next 10 years, Lucien countered. Law enforcement is getting smarter. Technology is making it harder to hide. We either adapt or we become extinct. Your choice. And who decides how this adaptation happens? You? No, all of us. That's the point of federation. Regional autonomy with collective decision-making on issues that affect everyone. They went back and forth for hours. Harrington played moderator, surprisingly even-handed given that he'd tried to burn them alive 12 hours earlier. But he was smart enough to recognize that forcing a total victory would just create insurgencies that would never end. By late afternoon, they had the outline of an agreement. Territorial autonomy preserved. Shared infrastructure for shipping and distribution. Collective bargaining with law enforcement and politicians. And a council structure where major decisions required consensus. It wasn't revolutionary. It was pragmatic. And maybe that was better. There's one more thing, Harrington said as they were preparing to sign the agreements. Elena Petrov. She was operating under my guidance. Her death created complications for my operations. I want assurances that there won't be retaliation against my people for her actions." Lucien's expression went very still. "Elena raised me," he said quietly, "fed me, taught me, kept me alive when my father would have discarded me as weakness. And then she tried to have me killed to preserve a vision that died with him." He looked at Harrington. "You don't get assurances. You get an agreement that we move forward without dwelling on the past. Elena made her choices. She paid for them. We're done. That's acceptable." They signed, every representative, every family. A framework that would govern organized crime's transformation into something that could exist alongside legitimate business. It wasn't perfect. It wouldn't solve everything. But it was a start. The return flight to America was quiet. They were all too exhausted for conversation. Seraphina slept with her head on Lucien's shoulder while Margaret and Marcus worked on implementation plans across the aisle. Victor had stayed in Moscow to handle his operations there, but not before making Lucien and Seraphina promise to visit. "I want to see how this experiment of yours develops," he'd said with that shark smile, "and I've grown fond of your wife. She has fire." When they finally landed back in the States, it was late evening. The city spread out below them, lights glittering like promises. Elena's people, now Lucien's people, met them at the airport with vehicles and security. The transition of power had happened smoothly in their absence. Operations had continued. The empire hadn't collapsed. They drove through familiar streets toward the northern safe house, which had become their de facto home since the estate had burned. "What happens now?" Seraphina asked as they pulled into the underground garage. "Now we implement the agreements, transform the infrastructure, build something that matters." Lucien helped her out of the vehicle. "And we figure out what normal life looks like for people like us. I'm not sure normal is possible anymore. Probably not, but we can try." The safe house felt different now. Not like a temporary shelter, but like the beginning of something permanent. Margaret went straight to her room to sleep. Marcus disappeared into the office to start coordinating European operations. That left Lucien and Seraphina alone in the main living area, standing in front of windows that overlooked the harbor. "I've been thinking," Lucien said slowly, "about what comes next, for us specifically." Seraphina turned to face him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we got married to settle a debt. We stayed together to survive, but we've never actually talked about what we want our marriage to be. Beyond survival, beyond strategy." He took both her hands. "So I'm asking, what do you want, Seraphina?" She thought about the woman in the blood-red dress, the forced wedding, the gunfights and betrayals and desperate gambles that had brought them to this moment. "I want what we promised each other in that alley when Viscari had his gun pointed at us. Together. Not as a strategy, not as survival, just together. That's what I want too." Lucien pulled a small box from his pocket, "which is why I want to do this properly this time." He opened it. Inside was a ring, simple platinum band with a single diamond. Nothing ostentatious, just beautiful. "The first time I married you was a transaction," he said quietly. "This time I'm asking. Seraphina Vale, will you marry me? For real. Because I love you and I want to spend whatever time we have left building something with you. No debts, no obligations, just choice." Tears were running down Seraphina's face before she even realized she was crying. "Yes, God, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. They kissed while the city sparkled below them, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and somehow turned it into something real. "When?" she asked when they finally pulled apart. "Whenever you want. Tomorrow. Next year. Whenever you're ready to stand in front of people and make promises that actually mean something. Soon," she decided, "before the universe throws more chaos at us. I want one moment that's just ours. Just us. No guns, no threats, no negotiations." Deal. They planned the wedding for 3 weeks out. Small ceremony. Just Margaret, Marcus, Victor flying in from Moscow, Anton who'd been cleared of suspicion and reinstated, and a handful of people from both their lives who'd survived the chaos. No blood-red dress this time. Seraphina wore white, simple and elegant and entirely her choice. Lucien wore a suit that wasn't tactical gear disguised as formal wear. They stood in a garden overlooking the city while a friend of Margaret's performed the ceremony. Real vows this time. Real promises. I promise to stand beside you, Lucien said, voice rough with emotion. Not because I own you or control you, but because I choose you. Every day. For whatever time we have. Seraphina's voice was steady despite the tears. I promise to be your partner in everything. The business, the transformation, the inevitable chaos that comes with being us. I promise to throw champagne bottles at anyone who threatens you. And I promise to love you even when you're being impossible. Everyone laughed at that. They kissed as husband and wife for the second time. But this time it meant something beyond strategy and survival. This time it was real. The reception was held at the same garden. Champagne that wasn't weaponized. Food that wasn't interrupted by gunfire. Music and dancing and the simple joy of being alive. Seraphina danced with her father, who'd been shocked to learn that his debt had been manufactured but had accepted his daughter's new life with surprising grace. He looked older, worn down by guilt and gratitude in equal measure. I'm sorry, he said as they moved across the dance floor. For everything. For the gambling. For putting you in this position. You didn't put me anywhere, Dad. Elena did. She set us up. Seraphina squeezed his hand. And honestly, I wouldn't change it. This life is insane and dangerous and nothing like I planned. But it's mine. I chose it. You love him. I do. More than I thought possible. Marcus Vale smiled sadly. Then I guess something good came from my mistakes after all. Later, Seraphina found Margaret standing alone near the garden's edge, watching the celebration with an expression that might have been contentment. Thank you, Seraphina said, joining her, for saving us in that warehouse, for giving Lucien a second chance, for all of it. I should be thanking you, Margaret replied. You gave my son something I couldn't, hope, the belief that he could be more than Alessandro's legacy. She turned to look at Seraphina. He was dying inside before he met you, becoming exactly what he hated. You changed that. We changed each other. Yes, you did. Margaret smiled. That's what real partnership looks like. Mutual transformation. Your father-in-law never understood that. I hope my son is wiser. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching Lucien dance with one of Victor's people who'd made the trip. The Russian was teaching him some traditional dance that involved more stomping than rhythm. Everyone was laughing. This was family, messy and complicated and built from chaos and choice in equal measure, but it was theirs. As the evening wound down, Lucien found Seraphina near the champagne table. Ready to go? He asked. Where? I have a surprise. Come on. He led her to a car waiting outside the garden. They drove for 20 minutes, heading away from the city toward the coast. Finally, they pulled up to a house that Seraphina had never seen before. It was beautiful. Not a mansion or a fortress, just a comfortable home overlooking the ocean. Lights glowed in the windows. The front door stood open like an invitation. What is this? She asked. Ours. I bought it last week. Figured we needed a place that wasn't a safe house or a temporary shelter. Somewhere we could actually build a life. Lucien looked almost nervous. If you hate it, we can find something else. I just thought... She kissed him to shut him up. It's perfect. They went inside. The furniture was minimal, but well chosen. Big windows overlooking the water. A kitchen that actually looked designed for cooking instead of tactical planning. Bedrooms on the second floor. A home. Seraphina walked through it slowly, running her fingers along walls and countertops, imagining what their life might look like here. There's one more thing, Lucien said from behind her. She turned. He was holding a folder, medical records from the look of it. I had the doctor run some tests after Moscow. After everything we'd been through, I wanted to make sure we were okay. His voice was careful. Turns out we're more than okay. Seraphina felt her heart stop. What are you saying? You're pregnant, about 6 weeks. The world tilted sideways, pregnant. She was pregnant. They'd created a life in the middle of all that death and chaos and violence. How? She started, then laughed because of course she knew how. I mean, when... Best guess? Right after the warehouse, when we thought we were going to die and decided to live instead. Lucien set down the folder and crossed to her. I know this wasn't planned. I know our life is still complicated and dangerous. But if you want this, if you want to try, I want this. The words came out fierce and certain. I want everything with you. The business, the transformation, the chaos, and now this, a family. He dropped to his knees in front of her, pressing his forehead against her stomach. I'm going to be a father. You're going to be a great father, terrifying and overprotective and absolutely ridiculous, but great. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped around each other, processing the reality that their complicated, violent, impossible life was about to get even more complicated. And somehow, that was okay. Better than okay. It was everything. 7 months later, Celeste Margaret D'Aquila was born at 3 a.m. in a private hospital with enough security to protect a head of state. She came into the world screaming with fury, and her father's black eyes and her mother's stubborn determination written across every inch of her tiny face. Lucien held her with the kind of wonder usually reserved for miracles. She's perfect, he whispered. She's ours, Seraphina corrected, exhausted and elated in equal measure. Margaret arrived an hour later, followed by Marcus and Victor, who'd flown in from Moscow specifically for this. They stood around the hospital bed looking at the sleeping infant like she was the most precious thing in the world, which she was. What kind of world are we bringing her into? Marcus asked quietly. A better one, Lucien said with certainty. We're making sure of that. And they were. In the 18 months since the Moscow agreements, the transformation had continued. Slowly, imperfectly, but steadily. Violence was down across every territory. Revenue was up. Politicians who'd once run from association were now quietly partnering with the new infrastructure. It wasn't revolution, it was evolution. And it was working. Seraphina watched her daughter sleep and thought about the woman she'd been before all this. The woman who'd walked down an aisle in a blood-red dress, expecting to survive 30 days at best. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from another life. The person she'd become was harder, scarred, capable of violence when necessary and negotiation when possible. A wife, a mother, a partner in an empire that straddled the line between criminal and legitimate. She wouldn't change any of it. Not the fear, not the pain, not the impossible choices, or the night she couldn't sleep, or the way her hands still shook sometimes when she heard unexpected loud noises. Because all of it, every brutal, terrifying, impossible moment, had led her here. To this hospital room, this family, this life. Lucien's hand found hers in the dim light. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. They'd been through too much together to need words for the simple act of being present. Outside, the city continued its rhythm. Inside, they'd built something that mattered. Not an empire. A family. 5 years after that blood-red wedding, Seraphina stood on the balcony of their coastal home watching Celeste play in the garden below. Her daughter was running through the grass with the kind of fearlessness that came from never knowing hunger or danger or the weight of her parents' past. Lucien appeared beside her with 2 cups of coffee. She's getting faster, he observed. Soon she'll be faster than me. You're getting old. I'm 39. That's not old. You've got gray hairs. 3. I counted. He sipped his coffee. Margaret called. The European expansion is ahead of schedule. Marcus wants to open operations in Southeast Asia next year. How do you feel about that? Cautiously optimistic, which is about as good as it gets in this business. He set down his coffee and pulled her close. How are you feeling? Honestly? Seraphina leaned into him. Tired. Grateful. Still processing the fact that we survived long enough to have a 5-year-old. Some days I can't believe it either. His arms tightened around her. But we're here. We made it. We did. They stood like that, watching their daughter chase butterflies through the garden while the ocean whispered against the shore. The empire they'd built together was thriving. The violence had diminished to manageable levels. The transformation they'd fought for was becoming reality. It wasn't perfect. There were still threats. Still enemies who wanted the old ways back. Still nights when Lucien woke up reaching for a weapon that wasn't there anymore. But they were building something better. Something that could exist in daylight instead of shadows. And in the end, that was all anyone could ask for. A chance to build something better than what came before. A chance to choose love instead of fear. A chance to survive and maybe, just maybe, to thrive. Celeste ran up to the balcony, breathless and laughing. Mama, Papa, come play! Seraphina looked at Lucien. He smiled and took her hand. "Coming, Principessa," he called down. They went to play with their daughter in the garden, leaving the coffee to cool and the empire to run itself for a while. Because some moments were too precious to miss. Some moments were just for living, and after everything they'd been through, all the blood and fire and impossible odds, they'd earned this. A quiet afternoon. A laughing child. A love that started as a transaction and became something real. This was the empire they'd really built. Not the infrastructure or the money or the power, but this, each other. And that was worth more than all the rest combined. Years would pass. Celeste would grow up in a world her parents had transformed. She'd learn about their past in careful doses, enough truth to understand, but filtered through the knowledge that people could change, that violence could give way to something better. She'd never wear a blood-red wedding dress to pay a debt. She'd choose her own path, make her own mistakes, build her own life. And that freedom, that simple ability to choose, was the greatest gift Lucien and Seraphina could give her. The sun set over the coastal house, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Inside, a family sat down to dinner together, laughing, arguing over vegetables, being ordinary in the most extraordinary way. This was the happy ending no one expected. Not perfect, not without scars, but real. And that made it worth everything. The story that began with a desperate transaction in a darkened hall ended here, with love freely given, with a child who knew safety, with two people who'd found each other in the darkest circumstances and chosen to build something bright. Sometimes the best revenge against a violent world is simply refusing to let it make you cruel. Sometimes survival means more than just staying alive. Sometimes it means finding someone worth surviving for. And building a life with them that proves hope isn't just for fools. It's for survivors. It's for fighters. It's for people who look at impossible odds and say, not today. It's for Lucien and Seraphina, and the family they built from ashes and choice.